Kyle, thank you for coming on. It took a very, it was just a long and arduous journey to get you on the stream, and I understand you're, you're one of the most famous rising progressive voices on YouTube, and it's rather difficult to get people like yourself on. It's understandable, but you've made it. You finally made it, and I'm very excited to have you on because we briefly had a conversation on TYT's main show when we were doing the progressive, what was it? The Progressive Agenda.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was blown away. You blew my fucking back walls out, dude, with your progressive agenda, which we will get to in a second.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. You can tell I'm pretty nerdy to sit down and think of all of those things. And then,
dude, it's awesome. It's awesome. It was brilliant. It was great. We're gonna get to that in a second, but let's just get started, okay? Because like this is something that I've heard of so many times. This is something that people talk about all the time when they reference you. They say Big Seltzer. They say you have sold out to the globalist Big Seltzer capitalist corporations. Can you describe to us what that is?
Yeah. First of all, I find it hilarious because the internet is just it's its own monster. Like some things take off and other things don't take off, and sometimes like you want something to take off and it doesn't, but then a thing that you thought was like a total side point just becomes gigantic, and that's exactly what happened with Big Seltzer. So basically, to explain that, there was one day, this is probably all the way back in 2013, I was in the middle of a rant and I caught a mean cough. Like I don't know what it was. It felt like, I don't know, swallowed some fucking lint or something, and I just started coughing like crazy, and it was bad. Like my face was red, and I was like choking, and I had to reach to the side and take a sip of my drink. It happened to be a seltzer. Now, I forgot to edit that part out when it went on YouTube, so the whole thing is in where I'm like coughing, grab the seltzer, and what happens is I chug it and get rid of the thing in my throat, and then I basically say like, hey, this isn't an ad, and I happen to have seltzer here, of course. I'm like, hey, this isn't an ad for, and I think it was vintage seltzer at the time. I was like, for vintage, but it may as well be. I said something like that, and
disgusting. You're a dirty capitalist.
What happened?
And we hate it.
Wait, but the story gets better. So what happens is later on Twitter, some user who I can't give credit to because I forget who it was, and I apologize for that, but some listener to my show, took that clip, sent it to Vintage Seltzer on Twitter, and said, "What are you guys doing? You have to hook a brother up. Like, go give him something, give him some seltzer or something." And I read it. I started laughing. I checked like an hour later. Vintage Seltzer responds, and they go, "You're right. We're gonna do exactly that." And so they sent me like this little gift basket that it was actually really good. So it had a seltzer shirt in there, but then it also had like the discontinued flavors, which were absolutely delicious. There was like a pineapple one and a strawberry one, and I was like, this is amazing. So anyway, the next show I go out there, I tell everybody the story, and I explain how it happened. Your boy sold out, and he sold out to Big Seltzer. And then ever since then, it took off, and now my name is synonymous with Big Seltzer, which I find hilarious because other than that basket, I've got nothing for it. Like, I don't actually have a deal with them. Not saying I wouldn't accept it because I love seltzer, but everybody thinks, some people probably think I actually sold out. Most people know it's just tongue in cheek and it's whatever, but I thought it was hilarious. It was really interesting.
Yeah, really interesting that you've outed yourself as a Big Seltzer sellout, and it was I didn't think about this. Like I didn't think that you would actually be a sellout to a big corporation such as Vintage Seltzer, or they try to make it seem like they're vintage, but what's vintage about stealing water and then I don't even know what the process is. I hate seltzer too, by the way.
You did not just say that.
I fucking hate seltzer, dude. It's the worst.
I'm going to make my case for seltzer because I have to. First of all, I used to love soda because who the hell doesn't love soda? It's delicious. But then I realized at a certain point that I can't just drink this forever because it's terrible for you. Like, it's really bad. You're just chugging like pure sugar. And
I love Diet Coke.
But I don't like drinking water either. So I was like, well, what's the midpoint? The midpoint is literally bubbly water. And so seltzer, like, I used to hate it too, but then there was a point where I basically, like, it was like I learned to love it. It was like an acquired taste because I was like, I don't want to just drink water. And so seltzer was the perfect middle ground where it's some bubbles in there. So you get some of the good aspects of soda,
But
plus
like
none of
that's
the
the
bad
worst
aspects.
okay, so you took oh, look at he's doing it again. Boys, he's doing it. We got him. We
And
got him,
this one's,
boys. It's over. It's over. How could you call yourself a progressive and yet you have sold out to bottled water and bottled seltzer corporations? You know what? The only
doubling up,
redeeming
bruh.
quality of this is the fact that you're not drinking LaCroix, which is the worst.
That's the
So,
one I never drink. I never drink LaCroix, ever,
okay,
because
good.
it's so popular.
Someone did a text to donation dono thing, but I totally skipped it, and for some weird reason my background audio is terrible. But we're probably not gonna have any text to talk donations for the duration of this conversation, so I'm gonna shut off the alerts for now. So sorry everybody, sorry liberals, it's not gonna happen. I know you're probably trying to get your messages across right now as Kyle's on the stream, but not gonna happen right now. Okay, so I drink like around 4 to 5 Diet Cokes a day. But
You're like
think,
Trump, man.
carbonation, yeah, no, for real. Like there are a couple things that I agree with Trump on, and Diet Coke is one of those things. So what are you gonna do? You know, a broken clock is true twice a day, and Trump is absolutely right about Diet Coke. So, but speaking of things that Trump is right about, and this is a really good segue into our next conversation, a point that we both agree on to some degree, Trump pulling out the troops from Syria. So let's talk about it. What's your perspective? Give us your short and sweet perspective real quick.
I mean, I'm for it. I mean, to put it as simply as possible, I think there are some genuine concerns about how he's going to do it. Like there's the $3.5 billion arms deal with Erdogan, and now he's pulling out. And, you know, the narrative is, the consensus is Erdogan will probably make a move on northeastern Syria, and that's concerning a lot of people. And I understand those concerns. I don't want to like totally swat them aside, but Trump's correct that we should get out. I mean, I just think that you also need to do diplomacy behind the scenes, and you need to actually work with the Syrian government so they can take back the northeastern portion of their own country, so that there's some security set up for when the U.S. does get out. But I mean, to make it as simple as possible, I think what's happening is a lot of establishment-minded Democrats are taking that concern about the Kurds, and they're using that to basically nuance troll us all and gaslight us and say like, well, that's why we need to stay in, because we have to worry about what's going to happen in the northeastern part of Turkey. And it's like, well, no, you're supposed to have an anti-war position if you're on the left. That doesn't mean that like all war by definition is wrong. I mean, wars for defensive purposes, I agree with, but I think that this is being used by establishment-minded Democrats to basically, they're exposing themselves as having zero principles and zero actual ideological policy-based beliefs. And to now be in favor of a war that was offensive and illegal under U.S. law and international law because now Trump is getting out of it, I mean, it strikes me as honestly comically stupid. And I get really frustrated when I see people, take that position. And unfortunately, it's very common. I mean, there's been very few.
I mean, we saw
obviously
this with North Korea too, right? Remember, I don't know what your perspective was, but I did a coverage of Rachel Maddow's perspective on North Korea, and Trump obviously was really reactionary in the beginning of the North Korean peace talks. But once a peace commission had started conversing without Donald Trump and without U.S. involvement once there was a commission between the South Korean president and Kim Jong Un, there was no reason to continue escalating military presence in the region, and yet liberals like Rachel Maddow were like, this is playing directly into Putin's hands, and you need to be more reactionary and you need to be more militant. And I think that is a partisan issue that a lot of liberals just care about party politics and only have the framework of analyzing the world not from an ideological perspective or not from like a moral perspective, and yet what is good for the Democrats versus what is the Republican position. And that is really shocking and disingenuous to hear from someone that I used to respect, like Rachel Maddow at some point.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, I think that the lion's share of the credit goes to President Moon in South Korea, because apparently he'd been working for something like this to happen for a very long time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that went on behind the scenes. Like they were doing the hard work. And basically, he's really smart because he played into Trump's ego and he basically allowed Trump to kind of take the credit because he cares more about the actual goal itself of peace. So that was a really intelligent move because then you allow Trump to kind of jump in front of the parade and allow it all to happen, because obviously the U.S. could put an end to it in a second if we really wanted to. If we don't want peace there, we could really just end it in a second. So I thought that was a brilliant move on his part. But you're right. I mean, Trump even just laying back and allowing that to happen and then taking credit, whatever, I'll take it.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I said my bar is low on the issue of North Korea for any president. I mean, my basic position is as long as you don't get us into a hot war, okay, you get a passing grade on the issue of Korea. So, yeah, I think you're right about that. That's another issue where, unfortunately, a lot of people have proven to not really care about the substantive issues. And it's hard for me to wrap my mind around that because then it's like, why are you involved in politics? I don't get it. Like, so you have to care more about actually improving people's lives and doing the right thing than you care about partisan politics.
Yeah, than just securing the Democratic Party's position of power. Like, who gives a shit? That's exactly how we got to this mess. That's exactly how we got Donald Trump in office, because liberals weren't doing enough. And they didn't have any prescribed solutions to a lot of the problems that Americans were facing. And they kept saying, no, everything is fine, everything is good. Versus the other side was like, no, it's actually the immigrants, or it's actually the immigrants and you should be terrified, and it's actually the liberals that are at fault and you should be terrified, and that's why you should vote for us. So at least Donald Trump, an anti-establishment seeming candidate, even though he's a billionaire, went in there and I guess blew up on his platform, at least blew the establishment up in some ways, and that's why he was tremendously popular. But I hope we just don't keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again on the left. And I think that's something that you talk about all the time. But going back to the Rojava conversation, because a lot of people, even on the left, and I'm not referencing liberals now, I'm actually talking about leftists like Marxist-Leninists, tankies, have, of course, a lot of sympathy for the Kurdish diaspora. I myself am a part of this, and even, I guess, put myself at risk by talking about this sort of stuff, because Turkey does have some serious laws surrounding these sort of conversations, and I'm jeopardizing my own safety when I talk about the Kurdish diaspora, and yet people incorrectly assume that just because I'm Turkish that I'm excited about this decision because I don't care about the Kurds, and it's really weird that people assumed, even for a brief moment, that the United States would ever help out a communist, ever help a communist country develop in that region, or in any region. Like, historically, the only time the United States has ever helped out quote unquote communists was Pol Pot, in order to destabilize other successful, viable nations that were democratizing in a successful way, or socializing in a successful way. So they never would have, I don't think they ever would have actually wanted to implement or help build a communist Rojava in the way that leftists like to mythologize or I guess promote. But
yeah, and I actually believe in a free and independent Kurdistan, and I know that would almost, it's like throwing a giant bomb in the Middle East and just dropping it out there and saying, all right, it's a free for all. But the reality is, the U.S. kind of and the West, I should say, actually, kind of artificially drew a lot of borders in the Middle East, and that's led to a lot of issues in the first place. But I do believe in a free and independent Kurdistan.
Same.
And the thing is, that doesn't mean you can then turn around and say, I support an offensive, illegal war under U.S. law and international law by us going into Syria, especially given the other facts about what we know about our intervention in Syria. Like, for example, we know it's a quagmire. We know we're on both sides at the same time. You had CIA armed rebels fighting Pentagon armed rebels. I mean, this is crazy. There's, of course, the story of so-called moderate U.S.-backed rebels beheading a child. I mean, this is stuff that's absolutely insane. And notice they'll flip the casual conversation about what's happening there will flip to whatever's convenient for the establishment in the State Department and the Pentagon. I mean, they'll casually go from, well, obviously we got to get rid of Assad, to now that Trump's pulling out. Notice nobody's talking about Assad. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, we were fighting ISIS. Yeah, ISIS was the thing. So there's just so much misinformation out there on this issue. And again, it doesn't mean that there's not a legit concern there. I think people are right to fear that, okay, we leave and then Turkey might, and the remaining Sunni extremists in the area also might do something against the Kurds. That's a perfectly legitimate concern. But you have to understand that you're basically a useful idiot and a puppet of the deep state if you say, therefore, we have to stay there and not have any clear defined mission, not have any plan for eventual withdrawal. You have to acknowledge that this is illegal and was wrong in the first place. The scandals that were there at all, not that we might leave now. And that's the final point is, it's not even like Trump tweeted this and it's good, but he's done this before with certain policies and then he didn't follow through. And, remember, it's Trump versus basically the entire CIA and the entire State Department here on this issue of Syria and Afghanistan. So there's a chance that we don't even get what he's saying we're going to get. But my point is, it's not like, because I know they love, resist Trump, resist Trump, resist Trump. You know what, man? I agree. But here's how you resist. In Afghanistan, the troop number there now is 14,000. He's pulling it down to 7,000. The way you resist that is to say, why are you only doing to 7,000? We've been there for 17 years. We've wasted $2 trillion. Again, you said you wanted to get Osama bin Laden. You said you wanted to get Al-Qaeda. Well, mission accomplished. They're not. Osama bin Laden's dead and Al-Qaeda's not in Afghanistan right now. But 40% of the country is still the Taliban, and that you're never going to change that. So if you want to resist him, say, here's my resistance from the left. So my position is going to be, I know you want to keep 7,000 troops there. Well, that's leaving the door open to escalate later, because that's exactly what happened with George W. Bush. That's exactly what happened with Obama. It's exactly what happened with Trump to this point. He said he was going to get out originally. He increased the levels. Now he's decreasing it again. I'm tired of this yo-yo. If you want to resist him, say, here's my resistance. I want us totally out of there.
Yeah. And speaking of the United States ever even being remotely interested in peacefully securing an existence for like a communist Kurdistan in that region, like an independent, free communist Kurdistan, or let's not even say fucking communist, let's say independent and free Kurdistan, right? Is preposterous, especially because, one, they had already sold the weapons to Turkey. Two, they had already allowed Turkey to escalate military conflict in the region when Turkey entered Afrin. If you think that Turkey was able to enter Afrin and other surrounding regions in that area without U.S. approval, you're kidding yourself, okay? They still have, it's not just Russians that allowed Turkey to do this. It was absolutely U.S. involvement as well. U.S. de-escalating or U.S. pulling out their troops is only a good thing, and we can finally have a peace conversation in Syria where whether he is a butcher or an awful human being or not, where we take seriously even Assad himself as a leader. Because what we saw with a previous leader in the region that was also violent as well, what we saw with an escalation of conflict, especially with boots on the ground and like military warfare, was what happened with Saddam Hussein. In the end of the day, at the end of the day, sorry, people always make fun of me for saying in the end of the day. At the end of the day, it's much better to have a serious conversation where you respect the other leaders in that region, whether you appreciate their tactics or not, or whether you think they're violent and brutal or not. They have a better understanding of how to bring about a peaceful solution than the United States certainly does. And the United States' track record is significantly more violent than Saddam Hussein's or even Bashar al-Assad's.
And by the way, I think the most important moral point to make about this is we are responsible for what we do. That's the moral point to make here. So now everybody's all up in arms and saying, oh no, we're to blame if Turkey maybe does or does not do something to the Kurds if we pull out. These are the same people who really didn't have much to say when we learned that we are actively backing a genocide in Yemen. And we're actively propping up 73% of the world's dictatorships. So if you actually care about doing the right thing and trying to care about human rights, I agree with that. But the way you do that is you're responsible for your own actions, not your neighbor's action, not the person who lives 3 blocks over. You're responsible for what you do. So how about a rule right up front? No more arming of human rights violators. That alone would solve so many problems. But it's like, it's obvious. It's like people are obviously just misdirected by the deep state and by the military industrial complex, where they easily fall into this trap of like defending empire as they think they're resisting it. And when people are screaming for us to stay in Syria, that's what that strikes me as.
Yeah. So we agree on that issue, but let's move on to an issue that we probably disagree on. Okay.
Let's do it.
You recently, or not recently, but like a couple months ago, you defended, I believe, Alex Jones. And you can elaborate on that, but then I want to kind of talk about free speech absolutism and your perspective on this issue, because we certainly don't see eye to eye on it. But I think we can have a fruitful discussion, and it also pertains to Sargon of Akkad and Patreon as well. So,
Yeah.
let's do it.
Let me start by just asking you, putting the Jones one aside for a second. Do you support the one on Sargon?
No, I actually said that despite his background and despite his like personal history and the fact that he is absolutely a gateway to the alt-right, I don't think that Patreon should have struck him down for conversations that he had with people outside of the platform on a totally separate podcast, even though the things that he said were genuinely racist, without a doubt, genuinely racist. I think they should have most likely given him fired off a warning shot and maybe even made like a symbolic suspension for a month or something like that. But to immediately take him off the platform, I think was going a little overboard. But that's my personal perspective, and maybe other people disagree with that.
Well, I'm happy that on the main point with this one, you and I agree. I wasn't sure if you were going to argue that, but the thing that really surprised me was when I learned the broader context, the fact that he was literally arguing with alt-right people. And
yeah, but he was using very racist, like he was using their style of conversating, I guess, or conversing against them. But that's really, like, I argue with Nazis and race realists all the time. But I would never use that term or use that word in the way that he did. You know what I mean? In an effort to get a reaction out of them, unless you hold that kind of belief. Now, that's a bad perspective to have, and that's really terrible. Does it deserve to be immediately deplatformed because of it? I don't think so.
I mean,
people.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, I understand the position of just don't say it. Like, I get that. But the context of it was he was trying to flip their ideology on them and saying, hey, listen, guys, by your own logic, since you're alt-right people, you're acting like a pack of N-words. Now, again, it's fair to make the point, hey, just don't say that, and that's tasteless, and that's classless, and all that. But, I mean, it is true that in context, he's actually, and he got a lot of crap for, like, in terms of, like, harassment online and whatnot.
Oh, yeah, no, it was the Nazis that literally
alt-right people.
Yeah, no, it was the Nazis that flagged him. They do this all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
They mass flagged him after this conversation, and they've done a lot of terrible things to him in the past too. I think he had his wife had to stillbirth pregnancy or whatever, and they would send him photos the same Nazis that he deals with all the fucking time would send him photos of like stillbirth babies. On his Twitter and stuff. Like, Sargon of Akkad is not a good guy, okay? He's not a fucking good guy. He's no free speech hero. He made his entire career off of Gamergate. He's trying to deal with the Nazis or whatever. He's just not smart enough to actually deal with them, unfortunately. But he certainly, especially in the beginning, he certainly had a lot of opinions that kind of were in allegiance with a lot of the anti-SJW right, or the Nazis in general. And I think he's still, he's made a career basically and a name for himself off of harassing women. In the end of the day, though, I still think that this specific instance did not meet my bar of we need to deplatform him. Whoa, what the fuck? I just lost you, dude? Are you still there? Holy shit, everybody! I don't know what just happened. Okay, I'm gonna. Kyle just got deplatformed, guys. Hold on. I'm going to call him again. Why does this always happen, yo? I don't even know. I don't know what's going on. Wait, I'm gonna send him a Twitter message to be like, what just happened? You broke up. It says he's active, and he's sending me a message, but for some weird reason it's not. Oh, there we go. All right, we're back.
You dropped out mid there. It was weird.
I don't know what just happened.
Because my internet's fine, and I think yours is.
Hold on. Let me just hopefully this will work. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I guess Big Seltzer came for you, dude. They were like, he knows too much.
All right, so it's working now?
Wait, hold on. Yeah, it is. I'm gonna go back to the. There it is. Okay.
Okay, that was weird. Just randomly broke up, but it's working now. We're good?
Yeah, it's working now. Hold on. Let me just make this larger as well. Boom. Okay. We're back.
All right. So I was hearing you, but then I think at the end of your point I dropped.
Yeah, I don't even remember what the last point I was making was. Oh,
it's just
Carlgon is bad. I just don't think that it meets. It doesn't meet my. It doesn't meet my my requirements for deplatforming someone.
Okay, so again, I'm happy that on the biggest point, you and I agree, but on details, we do agree. I mean, on a personal level, I actually like Sargon. I did 4 or 5 streams with him, and he's a very nice guy.
Oh, God. But, I wouldn't go that far.
Well, he lost me when Progressive Voice asked him what he thinks about Trump, and he just kind of flat out said, I'm a Trump supporter. And I was like,
yeah,
wow. And then he asked why, and his Progressive Voice asked why, and Sargon basically said, he triggers the libs kind of thing. And I was like, that's so vapid and that's so silly and I'm amazed that a guy who's able to think as well as he does, that's the conclusion that you came to. And then he really lost me when he, in my opinion, smeared Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and did a segment, I think it was titled Red Cortez, and basically accused her of being a democratic socialist in the original sense of the term, which obviously means post-capitalist, when whatever you think of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's actually just a standard social democrat. I mean, she may call herself a democratic socialist in the same way Bernie Sanders calls herself a democratic socialist, but they're both standard social democrats. They're not post-capitalist. So that's when he really lost me. But to get to on the issue of deplatforming,
he's not
honestly,
smart. Let's just before we get further in this, I have to push back on Sargon being smart. He's not.
But that's just an opinion. That's just an opinion. Okay. I mean, I disagree with the guy on so much, but that's just an area of opinion where we can agree to disagree.
Yeah. Okay.
But on the issue of deplatforming, I think I have a principled stance against deplatforming, because I think that when we talk about the principle of free speech or free expression, yes, we all get that it's not whatever they're trying to do with Tucker Carlson now, for example, among others. I get that it's not literally a violation of the First Amendment, but it absolutely is a violation of the principle of the First Amendment, because censorship doesn't just come from the government. Censorship comes in a variety of different ways. And deplatforming, whether people support it or not, it is censorship. It is a form of censorship. So I think I have a principled stance against it, because I feel it's gross. It's gross. It's just, let people speak even if they say horrendous things. And also, take Tucker Carlson. Let's say this succeeds and he's off air. It's not like Noam Chomsky is going to replace him. They're probably going to get somebody worse to replace him. So it's all this energy spent towards deplatforming somebody, and you don't even get anything for it in the end. So, I mean, I just have a principled disagreement with it, even though you and I, in terms of our sensibilities of what a lot of these people say, we might totally agree on those points. But it's the reaction to that I disagree with.
Okay. Well, so I didn't know that you also had had a hardline stance when it came to collective action and deplatforming in that respect, or using advertisers to put pressure on people in positions of power who are using their platform to spread hateful propaganda, especially when it comes to Tucker Carlson. And this is the same question I asked Glenn Greenwald and kind of dunked on him on Twitter about. But what is your perspective as far as what can the collective do against people who are purposely misinforming and purposely spreading hateful rhetoric in an effort to red pill or change people's minds and push them towards the right or further radicalize them in really just awful ways?
The only argument that I'm sympathetic to on this front is just the idea that if you take somebody like Tucker Carlson or you take somebody like Laura Ingraham and you go through their record of everything that they said, or you fact check them on any given night, I mean, I have no doubt that you can find 5, 10, 15 just flat out falsehoods in any given broadcast that they do. So if you come to me and you say, Kyle, listen, the whole reason why we're going to get rid of this person or that person for a job as a news person is because they're flat out not doing their job. They're just factually wrong in the things that they say. Well, then I'm open to that because that's just a standard employer thing. It's like, oh, well, I hired you to pave the driveway and now you're not paving the driveway. You're over there fucking my neighbor. You're fired because you're not doing your job.
Yeah, but when corporations don't do that, how do you show that as a collective? How do you show these powerful corporations, these powerful institutions that currently are completely unaccountable and completely unelectable and can do whatever they want essentially? How do you tell them, like, we as the people, we as American people don't actually appreciate this? We understand that this is damaging rhetoric and we need to fight back. And counter messaging obviously doesn't work, but deplatforming does work.
But let me explain why that's so short-sighted. Because you look at, and I made this point the other day on Rebel Headquarters, you look at stuff I say. The exact same way Tucker Carlson makes you feel is the exact same way that I make any random Ted Cruz supporter feel. So when I go out there and I speak about how the textbook definition of terrorism is violence done against civilians for a political or religious reason, and then I explain in a clear empirical way that oftentimes the U.S. is the world's leading terrorist, when I say those words, that is so outrageous to so many people in the country that if we take the standard that you're laying out there, they can take collective action against me, and I have no recourse, because if you poll my opinion on that, and actually I would say it's a fact, but if you poll my belief on that, chances are over 60% of the country is going to say, fuck that guy, he probably shouldn't be on TV like that. So we have to, like, there's a difference
there, though, right? There's a difference there, right? So,
not really.
Appealing to no, hold on. I'm gonna explain it to you right now. So one, we're appealing to the majority, right? So if the majority is moving further and further to the right, and as it has in the past 20 years, I would say, especially like in the aftermath of Ronald Reagan, like era politics, as the left is moving further to the right, and the right is moving even further to the right, like with the Tea Party movement and whatnot, and now Donald Trump. That appeal to a majority is actually is leading us down this really, really dangerous pathway, especially when it comes to people who are very intelligent individuals like yourself, who try to make it seem as though white nationalism or white nationalist propaganda, which specifically states its end goal as the eradication of whoever is not in the in-group, as though it is on the same moral playing field as someone who's saying that America's military intervention is violent. I know that you know that it's not on the same moral playing field.
No, but of course it's not on the same moral plane, but the point is, we're not talking about what is objectively the case here. We're talking about people's perception of what the case is.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And that's why I said,
it's an appeal to a majority, right? That's what I'm saying. It's still not logically consistent, especially when the.
No, and by the way, not logically consistent is saying that the collective. It makes sense for the collective to decide against Tucker Carlson, but it doesn't make sense for the collective to decide against me. That's not logically consistent.
No, I understand. There is certainly an element where we're trying to, especially because there's not enough education in this country, where we're trying to educate people on the right ways, and we have very limited opportunities to do that, especially on the internet. Do I think that this could be a dangerous precedent? Absolutely. But the right has been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah, but they've been able to. That's the point. The point is they're wrong, and I hate them, and I hate their tactics.
But no one cares about being morally consistent, or no one cares about.
I do. I care about that.
I know
very
you
much.
do, but in the end of the day, let's think about how it's something that you dunk on yourself, which is liberals trying to expose hypocrisy on the right. What do you think about that? You don't like that, right? You think it's ridiculous?
One of many tools, I think. It's not the end all be all, though.
It's not the end all be all. It's one tool, but it's not. It's rather ineffective because the right doesn't give a shit. They're hypocrites. They're like, who gives a fuck? Look at Mitch McConnell, incredibly successful, absolutely evil human being, but he's a hypocrite, and he doesn't give a shit. Because in the
Yeah,
end,
but you're
because
saying let's be opposite hypocrites. Let's also be hypocrites in the other direction.
no,
And I'm
let's
saying
use the
let's pick
same
a
tools that the
standard.
right is. Yeah, let's use the tools that the right has been using for years,
But
because
on
I see
principle, I
this as
don't
a
agree with them.
parallel to how the right has grown and how the right has been able to mobilize and how the right has been able to radicalize half the freaking country
Let,
by doing exactly this sort of stuff. Absolutely,
if
I think
if they
politically it
started
makes
doing
sense.
property violence, that doesn't mean I would support property violence. I actually support nonviolent, peaceful resistance. And I
Well,
understand that
well, I
sometimes
guess we have a difference in opinion on that one too. I think that
we
structural
do.
violence is, yeah, I think structural violence is an absolute necessity. If you look at things like the yellow vest protests, that sort of violence against capital is oftentimes the only way to get your message across. What's
I
more
disagree.
violent? What's more violent than the state, or what's more violent than
Nobody's
the
saying the
current
state's not
economic
violent, but
system?
you can get the same thing accomplished with a general strike because if you make the economy grind to a halt, the owner class has to listen to you.
No,
I get the
I
fact that
get
you're
that.
saying, hey,
No,
listen,
I
they
agree
were
with that as
violent.
well. I don't think these two should be separate from one another, but it is rather difficult, and sometimes you have to use the tools at your disposal. And this is why I publicly advocate for anti-fascism as well. And one of their tools is also to deplatform people. But like violence against capital is nothing in comparison to the structural violence imposed by the state.
You're doing comparisons. It's about moral principles.
Yeah,
You're
I don't
doing
have a problem
comparisons as
breaking
opposed to saying,
windows, is what I'm
here's my
saying.
standard. Here's my standard as to how we should act, and I'm going to try to abide by that. You're just saying, I don't know, they're really bad, so let's kind of be bad too. But when we do it, it's good.
Yeah, I am, because
Okay, well, I think that's stupid.
because that's like saying, like, okay, here, let's think about it this way then. World War II, like the U.S. military intervention in that instance was good.
Because Hitler was going to conquer the entire world.
That's what I'm
totally legitimate,
saying.
and that's totally separate. If you want to talk about flat out defensive violence, I'm 100% on board. But when you're doing a protest and you decide to shatter the windows of some dude's small bakery where he ekes out a middle class living, you're a fucking asshole.
Okay, I don't think that it is always correct. I'm not saying that it's always correct. I think it should be something that is used very rarely. But if there's any sort of widespread mobilization where just simple strikes are not going to be enough, especially because simple strikes are oftentimes met with police violence that we often deem as normal, and we think is like totally fine because the state currently has a monopoly on violence, or what is acceptable violence. There needs to be something more than simply just saying, hey, we're going on strike. Please, please don't cut our SNAP benefits and force us into a indentured servitude for like incredibly low wages, and actually apply those same beautiful free market principles you talk about all the time, the Trump administration. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, but I just don't agree on the tactics. I think if 25% of the country decided we're literally not going to work until we get a living wage, until we get Medicare for all, until we get an end to the wars, until we get the right to a union and a bunch of other policies, I think if that happened, they absolutely would have to listen to us because the economy would grind to a halt without us. But I also think that in the course of doing that, I would 100% advocate against doing any kind of violence unless it's defensive, because you have to appeal to people beyond our own insular group. And when you're out there and you're doing violence, that might turn them off.
By the way, I do think that oftentimes violent means, like, the biggest problem I have with violent means is that innocent small business owners who would still be members of the working class could potentially get unnecessary damage inflicted on their businesses and whatever, because it's very difficult to make this deliberate, because oftentimes these like sort of class struggles are decentralized. So I agree on that element, and I also agree on the element that it does make us seem incredibly unappealing to an overwhelming majority of the population who is either apolitical or privileged enough to not understand, or just obsessed with other shit that they don't focus on the real the material realities of living in America in 2018 or 2019. You know what I mean? So from that element, I agree with you. I think that it is always better, and I don't think any anti-fascist or any leftist will tell you, no, it's always better to just like break windows than to engage in direct action. That is a final move. That is like the last thing that you might have to do in order to protect yourself. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, yes.
And
let
violent
me be
protests do
clear.
end up working when push comes to shove, especially in countries where there's a lot more class consciousness. And that's precisely why I mentioned France, because it was very successful in France.
Yes, so let me be clear about what I'm saying. I'm not arguing that I disagree with it and therefore it is also ineffective. That's not the point I'm making. So the point I'm making is I take your point that in many cases it's very effective. And in fact, there's a good argument to be made that in order for Martin Luther King Jr. to work, you had to have Malcolm X.
Yes.
And you had to have the
Yes.
Nation of Islam.
Yes.
So I totally 100% agree with that point. But my perspective is that even taking that point, we need to be principled. And I think we can achieve the same things by doing really organized, nonviolent resistance on a mass scale. Now, again, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you on that. I don't disagree with you on that at all.
Then there's okay. So then I just want to get back to one more thing about the free speech issue, because this is to me where the heart of the disagreement lies. So if you look at what happened in Charlottesville, where they were marching and saying white lives matter and Jews will not replace us, and they were saying, hey, let's keep up this Confederate monument, and that was the whole point of it. It was like a week or two later that they had another far right march. And I remember that making the news and it being a big deal because literally like a dozen far right people showed up, and then there were like tens of thousands of counter protesters.
Yes, this was in I believe this was in Boston.
So to me, that's my ideal right there, because I know it sounds goofy when an idiot like Dave Rubin says it, like, oh, the free marketplace of ideas, bro. That's what like. He's a dumbass, and we agree on that. But it actually is true that that's an instance of the answer to the shitty speech was more speech. It wasn't censoring speech. And I think that when you look historically, all of the crackdowns on freedom of speech, they actually are used against marginalized people more often, because by definition, if you're marginalized, you're not in power. So the people in power will use speech suppression against marginalized communities, which is why, for example,
what they do.
There are cases against like the Black Panthers and Black nationalists and Black separatists where the government used speech repression against them. So the ACLU position of free speech absolutism, they take that position specifically because, hey, we understand the long-term benefits of defending the rights of this asshole Klansman, because if we don't defend his rights, well, then obviously you're not going to be able to defend the rights of the Black nationalist or the gay people marching through a very, repressive and homophobic town or whatever it may be.
Again,
so I think
the
that's
morality
the key
there
point, and that's why it's important.
The morality there is what is important to someone like myself. Because when Black Panthers are fighting for their communities, they're fighting for marginalized people in order to achieve, in order for their marginalized communities to get to a level where they have enough material support from the government and they can do whatever they like. They can possibly be on an equal playing field to achieve the American dream or whatever, right? And this is a very simplistic view of what they're doing, but it's not the same as the ultimate goal of a white nationalist. It's not the same as the ultimate goal of a Nazi.
No,
the ultimate goal of fascism is to eradicate the population. If the ultimate goal of, and there are Black nationalists, for example, there are certainly Black nationalists who are for, I guess, Black power beyond what the Black Panther Party did originally, who are also equally anti-Semitic, because all conspiracies always somehow go back to the Jews. And those guys are bad, and I would be in favor of deplatforming them, especially if their movement got to a point where it was genuinely a problem. Now, I want to give you one quote from Hitler himself, okay? I want to quote the boy Adolf motherfucking Hitler here for a second. After Hitler took power, he said, "The only one thing that could have stopped us if our adversaries had, from the first day, smashed us with the utmost brutality at the nucleus of our movement." Now, the reason why I say this is because fascists understand that they're always going to be unpopular. Fascists understand that they're not supposed to be normalized. Another ex-Nazi, Derek Black, talked about this on a piece in the New York Times as well, with like Donald Trump's statement as far as there were very fine people on both sides. That sort of normalization allows fascism to grow and focuses and creates an environment that is unsustainable for marginalized communities. So it's understandable that the collective get together, and that's why the anti-fascist movement is a decentralized local movement where anti-fascists get together and fight back to protect those marginalized people in their communities. And that's precisely why I agree with deplatforming someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, who was a clear and present danger even beyond his words to members of whatever community he was visiting, where he would dox DACA students, or he would dox trans students and like dead name them. That sort of stuff causes violence to happen on marginalized groups. So of course the collective is going to get together and try to fight back. Now, if the Nazis were trying to make that same exact argument, and they tried to do that, white identitarianism is definitely a thing. We can deal with that in a different way, but I don't think debating them and engaging them in the marketplace of ideas has been an effective tool, especially because we've been doing that for so long, and look where it has gotten us.
I actually just gave you a perfect example of when it worked. So I don't know what you mean by saying, oh, it's not working. I just gave you a perfect example, Charlottesville, and then the march after it where it worked. And let's also be clear.
Yeah, wait, you want to know why the post-Charlottesville march was tiny? Because of doxing.
Because everybody saw that they were assholes and the counter-protesters outnumbered them.
No, because they deplatformed, they effectively, and in an almost militant way, fought back against the Charlottesville protest, and they doxed them. That was the most effective reason why Charlottesville 2, the Unite the Right Rally 2, was ineffective and had nothing. Like they had like 20 people in comparison to the thousands.
You are so you made a point there about, well, listen, the reason why we obviously had to deplatform Milo is because he's causing violence to happen. You need to read U.S. case law and understand these things, because that's the exact argument that they used against Black Panthers and people in the civil rights movement. They said, listen, you're coming here and you're spreading these radical ideas, and we're not going to take it in our white majority town because this is going to lead for violence to happen. Hey, you're prodding these good white people who see your radicalism and they want to come back and fight against it. So you have to understand the legal standard that you're setting up. It's not only going to apply where you want it to apply. Okay. And that's the main point that you're missing. And also, since you decided to quote Hitler and apparently how, if we just crack down on free speech, obviously Hitler wouldn't have happened and this would have saved the day. Let me quote Noam Chomsky. If you don't believe in free speech for those you despise, you don't believe in it at all.
Okay.
And you know what else Chomsky said? Antifa is a gift to the right. This is the most predominant.
I love Chomsky, but I can disagree with him.
Intellectual on the planet, and he's saying Antifa is wrong because their tactics actually embrace what they say they hate about their enemy.
Okay, so I don't have to always agree with Chomsky. There are certainly elements of Chomsky's rhetoric
that I disagree with,
but I think he's brilliant. He's brilliant, and we both love him. And he is really important in what do you call it? In helping me develop a better understanding of U.S. foreign policy and whatnot. But in the end, again, to go back to that same concept of freedom of speech, or the structural, like the system using freedom of speech against marginalized groups, already happens in the examples that you've already mentioned, but that shouldn't stop us from actively fighting back against that as well. And that's the whole point. Just because a law is actively disenfranchising people, you don't try to abolish the law. You try to make it better. This is the same example.
A legal standard has to apply across the board, Haas. A legal standard has to apply across the board. So in other words, you're not going to be able to turn around and say, wait, don't deplatform those people because I kind of ideologically agree with them. Don't deplatform this Marxist who happens to believe in political violence because I happen to agree with that Marxist. But do deplatform this asshole on the right who believes in political violence also. That's not going to stand in court. Like, that's not the way that this works.
First of all, it would if we had incitement of hatred as an additional restriction that we have on freedom of speech, kind of like the already existing restrictions that we have on freedom of speech. Now, if you want to have a conversation about the legal standards, we can absolutely have a conversation about the legal standards. But that is where I come from, where I genuinely do think that an additional expansion on the already existing restrictions on freedom of speech would be with very clear guidelines, okay? With very clear guidelines would be beneficial. Now, I
totally disagree. I think we have it perfect in the United States in terms of our case law, in terms of how the First Amendment has been interpreted. And also remember, it's because we have the First Amendment that even idiots and assholes like Antonin Scalia had to rule that, hey, listen, these leftists who burn the American flag, I know that, this is overwhelmingly despised in the country when you take polls on it, and I know that you hate these people who burned our flag, But the great thing about America is that we live in a country that's free enough that allows you to burn the flag without locking you up. I think that's I think that's one of the best things about America is that we have freedom of speech. And then the final point I want to make on this is, listen, just real quick, you're not allowed to do free speech absolutism is not the same thing as free speech anarchy. So I'm not a free speech anarchist, but I am a free speech absolutist. So what that means is you're not allowed to do direct threats of violence. And I totally agree with that. You're also not allowed to do libel or slander. And again, totally agree with that. If you want to talk about like social media platforms, would I be okay with the rule against doxing? Yeah, I'm for that. Again, I'm not a free speech anarchist. I'm a free speech absolutist.
So you're against doxing too?
Am I against
not
doxing?
Yeah. Not doxing personal information in the sense that like they're doxing their houses and whatever, but revealing the identity of people who are participating in these sorts of activities is 100% have been an effective way to combat the rise of.
If Twitter or Facebook said, "Hey, listen, we have a terms of service. Here are our rules. We're going to be open and transparent about it. We're going to have a system and a process that you can see if something happens where somebody gets deplatformed." I'm saying if they included on their list of things, no direct threats of violence, no doxing, I'm totally for it. But bottom line is, my main thesis is we have to lean as heavily as possible on the side of free speech because that's freedom, and that's the heart of
but Kyle,
what it means to be free.
But Kyle, you yourself have explained that historically, even with this beautiful freedom of speech country that we have, with all of these beautiful free speech laws that we have, you yourself have described that most of the time, actually almost all of the time, the people that have opinions that are deemed a threat to the material goals of the U.S. empire oftentimes are the ones who are getting jailed or who are losing their jobs regardless. So why not fight back against not only the Nazis, but also the system itself? Because I understand the dangerous precedent that we're setting, but that precedent already exists. The reason why we don't talk, I mean, you and I agree on this when it comes to like defending Chelsea Manning, when it comes to defending Edward Snowden, when it comes to defending maybe even Reality Winner. I don't know what your perspective is on that, but we already lock up people for having positions that are deemed harmful to the overall goals of the United States. We already deplatform people like Noam Chomsky in this country where we're supposed to have free speech absolutism, and we already don't have that. Do you see what I'm saying? So
yeah, but you're just arguing for more of my position.
No, I'm saying that it doesn't work. That doesn't exist currently. So what we need to do is at least not, even if you're
compared to any country. The other countries that have hate speech laws, they have a worse system.
Yes, that's why I'm talking about adding additional restrictions on our existing hate laws. I mean, existing laws when it comes to freedom of speech, because we already have restrictions placed upon freedom of speech despite our First Amendment. So an incitement of hatred, which is already successful in all of these other countries, from Europe and all of these other comparable Western developed nations, from Europe to Canada.
Way too subjective. But incitement of hatred. Are you kidding me? They could use that against us, Haas.
I understand that, but my point is they're already using that against us without it. So at the very least...
No, Noam Chomsky's not sitting in a jail in Toledo, Ohio.
I understand that, but Noam Chomsky, first of all, Noam Chomsky is effectively deplatformed from all avenues, right? Like, he's not on mainstream media. He hasn't been on mainstream media since 1967 or some shit, when the last time he was on there, he was protesting the Vietnam War. And ever since then, he has never been back on CNN or MSNBC, if I'm not mistaken. So what I'm trying to say is currently we have privatized tyranny. And we have to fight back against it, because the only thing that people like yourself who are allies to the left or members of the left are doing when they try to make it when they actively fight for these sort of things is to provide an additional hurdle for leftists to overcome when they're trying to defend the rights of marginalized communities. Every single protest that has been successful in our past that we take for granted now was eventually violent. Do you see what I'm saying?
I don't. I have the exact opposite interpretation. In fact, one of my core points that I'm trying to make to you, and apparently I'm doing it ineffectively, is to try to explain to you that case law in the United States demonstrates very clearly that freedom of speech, the more we abide by it, the better it is for marginalized communities. That's the point I'm trying to make.
No, I know the point you're trying to make.
Right.
And
So
and what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that despite our current free speech absolutist understanding in the United States, we still are effectively deplatforming and leftist speakers by not having anyone who opposes capitalism in a meaningful and deliberate way on any of the platforms that are designated. And you're a Noam Chomsky fan, so you're already familiar with this, on any of the mainstream media platforms, because the ultimate goal of mainstream media is to uphold Western imperialism and uphold capitalism and the status quo in meaningful ways. So that already doesn't happen. You get articles written about Richard Spencer and how handsome he is, but you don't necessarily get articles about the left. And the reason why you don't get articles about leftists is deliberate. Because we have a structural opposition. We pose a structural threat to the future of the United States versus Nazis don't. As a matter of fact, they are supported by even members of the administration, because racism is different than class warfare. It drives a wedge. That sort of identity politics drives a wedge in class consciousness and in any sort of progressive collective action. So that's precisely why the freedom of speech only exists to protect white nationalists currently.
Okay, well then again, that final nugget you put on the end of that there, that's the opposite of the point I was making. You're with me until the end where you say, well, that's why the freedom of speech only protects white nationalists. No, case law is free speech protections end up being good for marginalized communities. We were able to protect the Black Panthers. You're able to protect, gay groups marching in areas that don't want them because of free speech protections. If you say to me, hey, Kyle, let's start this movement to try to get, let's do some social media activism to try to get Noam Chomsky, or he's a bad example because he's so old now, but anybody who's a leftist who's, prominent to get on
but Kyle,
on mainstream media sites, I would agree with that. I would say let's try to get them on there.
Okay,
but then the thing is, the point that I'm making is when they try to deplatform that person, we have to be principled. And now, we have to say, hey, listen, we don't want Chomsky deplatformed. And we're also the kind of people who didn't partake in the social media mob trying to get our ideological foes deplatformed.
Okay, but Kyle, who is, you say that the government currently stands to protect the interest of the many, and this includes marginalized communities as well. Who is, and I think if you think about this a little bit more, it will help you maybe develop a different perspective.
I think the same for you.
But who is no, I've thought about this. I used to be a free speech absolutist. That's why my position has changed.
You've evolved, bro. You've gone beyond the naive position that we have.
Come on. I'm not saying that. I'm not. Sorry. Of course. Dude, I respect everything you say and I respect your perspective. I'm just trying to
make
maybe
your point. I don't.
To make a point about something that you may not have considered, which is that, again, when the state does brutal and violent things, and this is like the police working against protesters, we call it an uprising, or we call it a rebellion, or we call it a riot, and any sort of violence against those protesters, oftentimes on the left, is deemed like a normal thing. It's deemed routine. The way we analyze violence currently is what goes beyond the norm. And this is very effective in analyzing leftist movements. Every time they're like the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, anytime that, or Stonewall, anytime there is leftist mobilization that is effective, the state does not protect them. The state doesn't go, oh, well, it's their First Amendment rights. The state tries to squash it with brutality, with the police force. So
you're conflating two different issues here. The point is that if you had...
But how? That's the state not defending their First Amendment rights, Kyle. That's literally what I'm saying.
By having crackdowns on... But the thing is, there's really not violent crackdowns on peaceful protests. If the cops get any inkling of an excuse like, oh my God, they broke a window, so now we're going to unleash hell on them and we're going to use tear gas and we're going to be decked out in our military gear. Yeah, that's wrong and that's bad, and I disagree with that. Yes. But the fact of the matter is, you can have a Malcolm X speak in a public square because of free speech protection. You did have that. Even back then. Even back in the 1960s, you had a Malcolm X speaking in a very public, open area in Harlem because they can't crack down on him because we have free speech protections. If you want to give, if the government is so bad, why would you want to give them more of an excuse to crack down on the freedom of people like us.
Okay. Again, this
We
is
need to
not
get
my
past this issue, though, because
perspective.
we've been arguing about this for 40 minutes, and I know you have more you want to get to, and I know you have a guest you want to bring on.
I know. Well, let's see if TRIHEX is. I want to have you back on so we can talk about this stuff too in the future if you're interested, because I didn't think that this was going to be like super oppositional or anything like that. But let me see if he's ready to go. Okay, hold on. You ready? And then we can bring in a third voice who may stand in opposition because he's a big fan of yours as well to things I might say. My point was...
We don't have to keep going on free speech. The audience is probably pulling their hair out.
Yeah. All right. We don't have to talk about that any further, but I would love to have a conversation with you in the future about it as well, or even in private, because I genuinely want to hear more of your perspective on this issue. Okay. Where was I? Where were we? Hold on. I asked him if he's ready. When he gets back to me, I will see. But let's move on to the next point, which was, again, beyond free speech. Another point of contention that we might have, or we don't necessarily have a point of contention, I think we have a very similar perspective on this, is the difference between democratic socialism and social democrats. You yourself are a social democrat. I want to hear about what you're like. I want to hear about what you like about capitalism and what you think is bad about capitalism, and what needs, and why don't you think that it's a structural issue, and rather just some significant reforms would genuinely completely erase all of the issues with capitalism.
First of all, that's a great question. Honestly, I think it just comes down to I'm a simple dude. I really don't think I'm all that bright, and
me either. But you're very bright. Don't say that.
I believe in evidence, and I believe in what can be empirically verifiable and proven to me. And through my research, I've basically come to the conclusion that the governmental systems and the economic systems set up in Scandinavia, I think it's great. Now, can we go beyond that a little bit and keep the happiness levels of the people in the respective countries high and have all of people's needs met and have a functioning good society? Yeah, I think we could go maybe a little bit beyond the Scandinavian model, but I think maybe ultimately I'm a little bit pessimistic about human nature and our capabilities and our capacities, so I don't really think a utopia is possible. I think we could get like somewhat close to it, and we could sniff a utopia out. Like we could see it just over the edge there, but you're never really going to get to a utopia. So I believe in what's empirically verifiable, and I see that systems that are hybrids of socialism and capitalism tend to score the best on, the UN rankings for happiness, tend to kick our ass when it comes to healthcare and the economy and economic mobility to climb up that ladder so that your kids do better than you. So, and to answer your question specifically about the capitalism part of it, I only have one little portion of my ideology that you maybe could describe as post-capitalist, which is, okay, I like the idea of incentivizing worker-owned co-ops. But having said that, I also think it would be a folly to like mandate it and to totally scrap the idea of having a traditional hierarchical business where you have a boss and you have people who, listen to the boss. And so I believe in a mixed economy. And I think the element of capitalism that makes everything function is that it is true that competition brings out the best in people. And it is true that when you have a clear vision and leadership at the head of a company, that you can get things done quicker and more efficiently. And you can use that thing in human nature about where we want to compete. And you could use that and harness it for the benefit of society. Now, the problem is, obviously, greed is not good. And you can go way too far in that way, which is where regulation comes in and socialism comes in. And in my mind, I like the idea of having a meritocracy where, but everybody has to have their basic needs met in a meritocracy. If you're running a 100-yard dash, everybody's got to start at the 0-yard line. You can't have a poor black kid born in Harlem starting at the negative 15-yard line, and you can't have Mitt Romney's son starting at the 85-yard line, and then you shoot the gun in the air and say, okay, run. So
yeah. But don't you think that is a consequence of intergenerational wealth and like
I do,
and
which
analyzing
is why
that from a historical materialist perspective, you understand that structural inefficiency, that structural inequality is built into the system because it upholds capitalism, because capitalism oftentimes needs a oppressed underclass to exploit. So
Yeah,
as a social
I don't
democrat, I feel
disagree
like you
with you.
see that,
I
right?
don't disagree with you on that point, but I think that my means of addressing that are a lot more milquetoast than yours might be, and a lot less radical than many people on the lefts might be.
I don't
Um,
necessarily have a radical perspective because I think that up to a certain point, you and I absolutely are in agreement. I have a more reformist perspective that is nonviolent, non-confrontational, unless it's an absolute necessity, and that necessity is dictated by the collective and in like localities, of course, or maybe even an uprising of if we somehow magically had some more class consciousness, if democratic means did not work. But ultimately, I believe that the pathway is through social democracies, and the social democracies that you're mentioning, like the Nordic model and whatever, they already feature some nationalization, and I think we gradually increase that until all manner of industry is automated and functioning efficiently, where we can expropriate the rest of like ownership back to the people, where everyone has a comfortable baseline where they don't necessarily have to fight over scraps, and there's always going to be issues there, and it requires a lot of enlightenment. It requires a significant amount of education, and perhaps that's the idealistic portion that I have, where Marxist Leninists disagree with me because they believe in like a vanguard coming together and pushing for or they believe in waiting for a revolution, and then ultimately a vanguard coming in and like restructuring our economy. But I don't. So
yeah,
I do think that social democracy up to a certain point, and then a democratic socialist utopia, and ultimately a communist utopia where it is classless, borderless, moneyless society, and this it will take a tremendous amount of time from our perspective as human beings, as mere mortals who live, at the very most 100 years. It seems unachievable in our lifetimes, which is understandable. But it certainly is achievable when you consider how radically politics has changed over 3, 4, 5 generations, and how tiny that is in comparison to how long humans have existed.
yeah. See, I can't even. The thing is that the last point you made about eventually, moneyless, borderless type society, I can't even conceptualize of how that comes about. So I just can't, I don't think it's going to come about because it just doesn't even strike me as inherently possible. And maybe, listen, maybe I'm a product of my own time, and my biases are so strong that I'm unable to overcome them. But I just can't conceptualize it, so I don't think that's possible. I see. My whole thing is, I think that you have a much more optimistic and idealistic version of what human beings are capable of, whereas I think we'll always have this element of tribalism within us as people. I think you'll always have a certain element of greed within even the best of us. So I think that since that's the case, we're going to be stuck in a social democratic system. And listen, in my opinion, I think those systems are wonderful, and I think they're great, and I think they foster human happiness. So I don't necessarily see a problem with that. But I don't like, you also kind of mixed in a little bit of a hint of futurism in there, because you were talking about like, I guess eventually we get the technology that kind of can do all the work for us type thing.
Well, I mean, it's
That's
already
something
happening, right? I'm
I
just
know, like, but
analyzing current trends.
I can conceptualize of that, so I don't know if I disagree with you on that point, but I do think that Stephen Hawking was right when he spoke about this, when he said that is going to require, you want to talk about class struggle, that is going to require a tremendous class struggle to make it so that the owner class, the elite class, knows that it's not an option for them to keep all the rewards of these future machines that create all the wealth.
Well, as a
That,
social democrat, you see the problem with that, right? You
of
already under.
course, of
Yeah.
course,
So the,
absolutely.
Exactly. So that's why I'm not an accelerationist, and that's why I wouldn't consider myself like a Marxist Leninist, because I don't believe in I don't believe in an immediate like violent revolution or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's not going to happen. It's just not going to, honestly, and I hate to shit on these people, but that's so idealistic that it actually pisses me off, because you have to, it's not a choice. You have to use the means that are most likely to work. And electoral politics, that's what it is. And it's not like, and over time, I should be clear about this up front. Over time, I've become more and more of the belief that the left has to get more involved in electoral politics. And that has a lot to do with the fact that I noticed this thing about the left that upsets me, which is whenever something happens that we don't like, there's this gut reaction of like, all right, well, I'm just going to check out of the system. And I've had so many conversations with people on the left who are just like, yeah, I don't vote. And it's like, well, what if you have a candidate who advocates for this? And they're just like, yeah, no, I don't vote. And I find the exact opposite on the right, which gives them kind of a built-in advantage, because whenever they have politicians who aren't doing what they want them to do, they just get more involved. And they're like, well, I'm going to make you do it. I'm going to run, or I'm going to get somebody I know who agrees with me to run, and I'm going to make you do what I want you to do. And this is one of many reasons, along with money in politics and the corporate corruption of our system, which has made it so that our system has just inched further and further and further right from the 1970s and onward. And I'm trying to reverse that, where people can learn about concrete, specific policy goals that will improve their lives, that we can all gather around and fight for. And those ideas are ideas that you and I both totally agree on: Medicare for all, free college, living wage, right to a union, end the wars, New Deal, legalize marijuana, end the drug war, so on and so forth. So, like, I'm trying to get the left to understand that we don't have the luxury of believing in an idea like, we'll just have a violent revolution at some point or something, bro. No, we don't have it. We don't have that luxury. We have to act right now, especially
I
something
fully
like
agree
climate
with you.
change.
I fully agree with you. And there are and to all who dunk on Kyle for being a fucking sock dem, or saying like, oh, Jenk and Kyle are suck dems or whatever, they are the only reason we currently have people who are pushing for the Green New Deal, for example. They're the only reason, because of the Justice Democrats, a coalition that they formed, the only reason why we have actual democratic socialists or people who are further to the left than any other politician except for Bernie running and winning elections right now. So yeah. This is the alliance that I talk about a lot. We might have our disagreements on really important issues like freedom of speech or how collective action should work in protecting the already marginalized. But in the end of the day, we agree that we should still use our democratic means when we possibly can. Now, I want to bring on TRIHEX, who's in here. And we can continue this conversation after he fangirls over you a little bit, because he's really excited. For those of you who are, you're already familiar. TRIHEX needs no introduction. I briefly gave Kyle, the rundown of who he is. He's a professional speedrunner and an awesome guy. I'm gonna add him to the conversation right now. I hope this works. Okay, I'm calling you right now, TRIHEX. Get in there, buddy. I don't know how this is going to work, by the way. I still don't know.
I don't hear him.
Okay, no, he just joined. Hold on. Let's see how this works.
Yeah, hang on. Wait.
Now I do.
Y'all,
wait, try it. So you got to put your camera on, right? Or are you?
Yeah. No, first I'm making sure my audio's good.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. I hear you now.
Okay, hang on. Let's make sure I haven't used this program in a while. Because I got like two microphones. I want to make sure I'm using the right one here.
We don't, us
While
gamers.
you're doing this, I'm just going to go take a piss real quick, but I'll be right back.
All right, perfect. Yeah, you go do that, man. Sorry. Sorry for...
Yeah, one sec.
Okay.
1 sec. And
now, while Kyle is gone, you guys can all tell me why I'm not being defensive enough, and I'm not fucking... TRIHEX isn't using his good mic.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah, I'm about to fix that right now.
Okay. Tell me how fucking wrong I am. Get Destiny versus Kyle.
All right.
All right.
I should sound good now, though.
All right. Everyone that keeps saying fucking we should have Destiny have these discussions instead of us on are actually being disrespectful to me. I don't know if you understand that or not, or if you have the capacity to realize that, because I'm perfectly capable of having this conversation with Kyle myself. I just also don't want to push back aggressively on someone whose work I appreciate and someone who I've deemed to be a valuable ally. Now, we can, of course, have a conversation specifically structured around freedom of speech in the future, but I don't want to fucking have Kyle come on the show and be nice enough to come on the show and then participate and then start dunking on him on his perspective on freedom of speech out of fucking nowhere. Yeah, he said Sargon of Akkad is smart. Who gives a fuck? Get over it, okay? Like, get the fuck over it, guys. Anyway, and also, while you're getting the fuck over it, use your goddamn Twitch Prime subs right now to fucking subscribe, or else I'm gonna lose my fucking mind, okay? Hassan, you're dumb. Yeah, whatever. Here. I want to see some fucking subs right now. I want to see some motherfucking subs right now. There we go. Thank you.
I want to say I'm getting my
Trigger-
webcam fixed right now.
Triggered
for you.
ass chat, dude. All right, yeah, I'm waiting for you to. No, don't worry, Kyle's not even here yet. So.
Dude, no, dude. I had a guy earlier, man. I'm starting to get some of that, some of this too, man. I had a guy who was like subbing with some obscene N-word bombs in his his Twitch name. It was the same guy over and over again. But he would never like tell me what he was mad about. He just kept doing it over and over again. And I'm like,
I'm
bro,
back, y'all.
You're still triggered, dude.
Yeah, oftentimes people are just angry. Like that's the whole point of. Kyle, we're waiting on TRIHEX to put on his camera. We're waiting on him to turn on his camera. But
Yeah, 1 second. I'm fixing
Kyle
it
is
for y'all
too
right now.
idealistic on Antifa tactics, and then for some reason very pragmatic when it comes to electoral politics. Sure. I don't know. Do you want to address that, Kyle, or no?
Yeah. I mean, I guess my counterpoint would just be, I'm principled on both issues. So I like to. I mean, we just had the debate. We don't have to go over it again. But my take on free speech, I have principles that I'm trying to apply. And then when it comes to electoral politics, it's the same thing. I have these ideas, these policies that I believe in, and the only way to actually get them implemented is for me to get involved and try to force them on the system by convincing people and getting people elected who agree and all that stuff. So I think it's the same kind of thing. But it was an interesting criticism. It's that I'm idealistic in one sense and not at all in another sense, I guess, is the point.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, so Erd Nawaz said, I'm further left than Kyle now, but he brought me over from the pre-alt left in 2015. So people, not everyone has the same level of interest in engaging in theory, or not everyone has the same level of interest in or the same opinions when hey, there he is. Okay.
There you go. All right.
But yeah, to finish my point, not everyone has the same kind of understanding or the same kind of worldview. So Kyle is of course, and others like Kyle are of course incredibly important, especially in America where politics is so fucking far to the right, where we can have these sorts of discussions back and forth, but in the end of the day, no one should forget that Kyle is not only an incredibly valuable ally, but a leader of the progressive movement in America. Whether you guys think, from your academic perspective, that his opinions on capitalism aren't far enough, it doesn't matter. He's still doing a lot more than most people, and he's engaging people, and he's pulling them away from the far right. And also, he has a lot of electoral prescriptions that I find to be genuinely intelligent and better than anything else I've heard. By the way, TRIHEX, you got to get maybe a little bit further to your right, I think, to be fully in the camera.
No, I got you. I can.
What I would tell those people, Haas, is I come as advertised. So I always find it, like, with me, I find it hilarious when people try to, dig deeper or beneath the surface, or what is he really trying to say, or what does he really believe? It's like, no, I'm telling you exactly what I believe, and I'm telling you, I even give people exactly how I describe myself. I don't even like the term progressive necessarily. I like either social democracy or populist left or libertarian left. Like, any of those labels I think are more accurate than just saying progressive, or than saying I'm post-capitalist. So the whole thing is, if you don't agree with that, fine. That's just whatever. I'm not the flavor of ideology that you necessarily agree with, and that's cool. But just know that you're getting I come exactly as advertised. So there's, take it or leave it is basically the point.
All right. There you have it, folks. Okay, so I brought in TRIHEX, who is a professional. He's a professional speedrunner. And one of the oldest and most important content creators on the platform on Twitch. He gets thousands and thousands of concurrent viewers watching him play Mario and a variety of different games all night, every night. And he's also a big seltzer boy. So I wanted to bring him on and introduce you to
respect,
so that you guys could have a conversation. Except we recently did a political compass test, and it turns out TRIHEX is even further to the left than I am. So I don't know. Maybe he will disagree with you now. Who knows? But here, without further ado, I just wanted to bring you two together.
Nice to meet you, man.
No, absolutely, dude. Oh my God, I'm my best here not to fanboy into absolute oblivion, man. Kyle, dude, you were dude. What do I even say, man? I don't want to derail y'all's conversation hardcore right now, but just to introduce who I am relative to what you currently do, man. There was a kind of went on this briefly with Hassan on our discussion 2 days ago, but I I recently, relative to the entirety of like even your channel, for example, recently got into politics. And as of like 2015, I was really getting into it. And prior to that, I was just a casual viewer of Daily Show of Jon Stewart, where it was like presented to me like an entertaining package of what was generally going on in the world of politics through its absurdity of all the corruption and things like that. And then whenever Jon Stewart stepped down, there was this like gaping hole in my life of like, how do I remain informed now? I have to actually apply effort. And through that, and through searching for other avenues to remain informed on the political climate in USA, I ran into your channel, like in 2014, and I've been the biggest fan since, man. I got to tell you, like.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I've never heard anybody tell me that like I became a kind of a replacement for Jon Stewart, but that's pretty cool to hear because I really liked his show too.
I'm jealous, dude. I'm jealous. TRIHEX has not said the nice things about me at the same level that he has about you, Kyle. I'm not gonna put that out there.
Yeah, no, that was
watch my show, dude.
That was a really nice compliment. I've never gotten that one before, but I really like that. Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I even like to give you an idea, man. I even debated trying to go to Politicon this year just to hang out, like just to see like you and David Pakman and all.
Dude,
the
it would have been fun, man. We had a lot of fun. At Politicon. I don't know when I'm doing one again, but definitely try to come if that's the case, because it really is fun. I mean, probably one of my favorite memories of being there was when I kind of crashed Chris Christie's town hall, and I asked him a question about weed because I know he's really anti-marijuana.
Right, he is.
And so I asked him that, and then I went to go leave like right after I asked the question, and like 20% of the room got up and then started following me out the door. And they had more questions for me than Chris Christie, and that was a pretty rewarding moment because I like took a bunch of his crowd from him. And then I told him, I was like, come on, we got to get out in the hallway before we talk, guys. I didn't want to like step on his event. But that's when it hit me. I was like,
Seltzer boys too? Is that what it was?
Yeah, they were big Seltzer boys. There were a few also. You know what the funnier ones to me is? The guys who are like, hey man, I'm a MAGA guy, but I don't hate you. And I always thought that was funny because I'm like, look at where the bar is set. Like, I like Trump, but I don't despise you.
Because you keep it real. The one thing I like about your channel, hopefully you don't ever feel like deterred from this, is that I know that you use a lot of strong language. Not that I'm against that at all, by the way. Like, I curse all the fucking time too. But like, you get emotional when I feel it's justified. When there's like just blatant hypocrisy or stupid bullshit going on, like you get uppity up and you're fucking young at the microphone. You're just like, what the fuck, dude? This is so stupid. And I love that. Man. I love that. Like, it makes it feel like, yeah, there are things worthy of getting upset about. Currently.
Thanks, man.
And I love that.
It's funny because whenever people ask like, oh, what's your style? I just think, I don't know. I just kind of read the news or look at some videos on the news and certain pundits who I know might be newsworthy. And then I just kind of talk about it. There's like, when I do a segment, I usually have just like some bullet points. Like I'll have the actual facts in the story laid out for me, but then I just have a couple bullet points and then I'm just riffing. And I feel like that's a new thing in terms of like a new style of political commentary and there was an evolution of it. So there was Jon Stewart, like you said, but he was kind of, obviously he's scripted because he's a comedian. But then there was like Rush Limbaugh, but that was the right wing talk radio. And I don't think they're really entertaining. I think they just say bad things and people watch or listen. But now I feel like it's a whole new thing. And actually, Haas, I think TYT, they were probably the godfathers of it.
Like
definitely.
That sort of punditry or that sort of op-ed, video op-eds. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think so. Yeah. This is the thing. Like a lot of people tend to overlook, especially when they get to a perspective where they're like further left than the people that they started off watching. And Cenk, of course, is the primary example that I use all the time, and even someone like yourself, is that. Like all of a sudden, just because you're now further to the left, you should not forget that people's starting points are never dengists. Like they're not fucking out there defending and claiming that China is a communist nation and all they're doing is great. You arrive at that point, which I don't even agree with, obviously, but like you arrive at that point because of people like Kyle and because of people like Cenk, where they, for the first time ever, provide you with an alternate perspective that you don't get from mainstream media. So it's very quick. It's so easy to overlook, and I see this with like anti-Bernie left people too, who still agree largely that Bernie's great. But and I do this too. I criticize Bernie every now and then when he says stuff like, "Oh, George H.W. Bush was fine." It's like, okay, well, I mean, he wasn't. Chill.
Yeah.
But
Yikes. Yeah.
But you know, it's just he's fucking Bernie. Like, he's part of the reason why there is a conversation about socialism to begin with. So just because you have advanced far beyond and moved into further and further areas of the left doesn't mean that like those people aren't incredibly important in mobilizing people. You know?
Yeah, I tried to read. You're reminding me of when I was like 16 or something. I tried to read Chomsky on anarchism, and I probably retained a grand total of 2% of the book. Like, most of it just went right over my head. So I started out by like punching above my weight, if you will. And that was a weird experience. But your point is basically the opposite, that like people start by watching a certain YouTuber or listening to a certain commentator or podcast or whatever, and then that opens up a doorway for them to explore these things further in ways that are different from where they started.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move the chat in a direction. Let's move this conversation in a direction that is more entertaining, I guess, for the people who are watching, because they're fucking complaining because they're a bunch of weenies. Hold on. Let me pull this up.
They like the arguing better than the love fest.
Dude, these guys are bloodthirsty. Okay, they're so used to me like dunking on Nazis and shit that like even if there's a little bit of opposition, they start claiming that this is a porno. They'll say like, "Oh, is this porn TOS? Oh, you guys are circle jerking each other pretty hard."
Yeah,
huh?
we're blowing each other.
Yeah,
they want blood.
They're so
I've learned that
used to fucking combat that people get very upset when people can have a reasonable discussion or a conversation, even if they agree on a lot of issues. Simon Scola, Kyle shouldn't have gone on this. Not a good look. Your fans are upset at me as well. Okay, so TRIHEX, let me ask you, how'd you start? You already mentioned how you started following Kyle.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask this question from you to Kyle. Kyle, are you a gamer? And what does it mean to be a gamer to you?
So we touched on this a little bit before we started the stream, but I think that if I call myself a gamer, people in the gamer community will tell me to go fuck myself, because it's just so normie gaming. You know, like if it to walk through my history of it, I mean, when I was a kid, it was Super Nintendo, and I played Donkey Kong, and I played Mario Kart. No, was Mario Kart on N64? I don't remember. But
it was on both Super Nintendo and
okay, I think I played it more on the N64. So I started Super Nintendo. I never had a Sega Genesis, although I wanted one pretty badly. And then I went to N64. I played a lot of games on N64. Then there was the PS2 era where I played a bunch of games on PS2. Then there was the 360 era.
You played?
Well, so the ones that I really remember, well, you're gonna make fun of me because it was for PS2 and for Xbox 360 that I remember the most, and a lot of it was, so there was some Rainbow Six in there for 360, which I enjoyed. It was one of my favorite first-person shooter games. I tried Halo and didn't like it. I wasn't good at it. And then the two biggest were Tiger Woods Golf, which I loved, and I would do the Call of Duty that had Nazi zombies, and me and my buddy would just play that all day and night.
Wait, so you didn't want to engage the Nazis in a meaningful discussion, and you killed them instead? Wait, hold on, that's
checkmate,
weird,
bruh. You got me.
What? I don't understand. Wait, like what if the Nazi zombies start killing you? You know,
well,
what if they use the same tactics against you, Kyle? That's terrible. That's scary.
First, I defeated them in the Battle of Ideas, and then I shot them. No, so that was the most recent, and then I haven't really gamed since. I never really got into PC gaming, but I almost regret that in a way, because it seems like that I really missed out on where the good stuff was, you know, using console instead of PC gaming.
Yeah, Quake comes to mind. Early generation Quake was super lit, from what I hear.
Rogan talks about every 8 seconds.
Yeah, Counter-Strike, CS Source was a big thing. I'm trying to think of what Battlefield 1948 was another one people loved. Team Fortress 2 was super lit throughout its time. Yeah, there's Half-Life. But, who am I to speak, though?
What are the two new ones? The two, I know Fortnite is the big one that people play a lot. And then what's the other one? Oh, Red Dead Redemption, right?
Ooh,
Yeah.
I love Red Dead
Yeah, that one
Redemption.
looks fun. Again, I've never played it, and I don't know.
You can burn KKK members with Molotov cocktails. It is excellent. Excellent.
Yeah,
Good praxis.
it looks cool. It looks
comrades.
like a Western type thing where you do what you want.
Yeah, it's pretty much, super duper HD GTA, but in the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, that sounds badass.
Yeah, no. Okay, so if I can come in here now about the whole gaming thing, there's two things there, right? There's kind of this. It's kind of minimized now, but I'm thinking back to some like gotcha attorneys who are like super anti-gaming, who love to deflect all the gun violence in USA back to the media, particularly gun violence to video games. And one guy comes to mind here, might be familiar with him, Jack Thompson. He was the one who was like super uppity about like, we need to make video games. It's the reason why kids are going crazy and shooting up schools. And it's like your argument's super weak because you're just deflecting, and there's much more hyperviolence in other medias, but you're gonna strictly target gaming. Sure. Since then we've had studies that debunk that kind of thing in the first place. But that aside, now, whenever I hear the term like, "Are you a gamer?" I feel like there's like a certain stigma attached to that, because like when you say you're a gamer, like it's like, okay, well, if you read books, are you a reader? If you watch movies, are you a watcher? But if you're a gamer, it's like, I don't know, it feels like a loaded statement. And even then, there are people who I feel who would say like, oh yeah, he plays games. He's a gamer. He's way out there. But in the same sense, though, if we go back to like 2010, 2011, you had people who were freaking addicted to Farmville on Facebook, but they weren't called gamers. So it's only
You're
really
not a real gamer until you start harassing female journalists on Twitter. This is a fact. If we're gonna talk about facts, and we can go back to the Sargon conversation for a brief moment, but that right there, my friends, is a real gamer. Okay, you gotta start this this mobilization against female representation in video games. Before you do that, you're not a real gamer. Also, speaking of Jack Thompson, he was disbarred by Florida because of his repetitive, frivolous, and insulting to the integrity of the court filings. So,
wasn't McCain big on this too? I think McCain
Hillary Clinton as
hopped
well,
on
if
the
I'm not mistaken.
anti-gamer thing.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. Anyone who's anti-gamer is I write them off. If Bernie Sanders was against video games and the violence in video games is too harsh for America, I would be anti-Bernie. Anyone who
it's actually been proven that that's nonsense. They've actually studied it, and I think the Australian government actually was one of them that did a study on it, and they were like, there's absolutely no connection whatsoever between violence in real life and violence in video games. That's actually an argument that's insulting to people's intelligence. The idea that like you can't tell the difference, or somehow it makes you want to engage in these things in real life. That's nonsense. I've killed, how many thousands of people I've killed in video games in my life, and how I have literally never once in my entire life thought like I'm going to murder an actual human being.
Oh, we know, Kyle.
Well, I think that's just like
from your perspective of peaceful protest and direct action that does not escalate to violence. We are well aware.
Hey, I do support violence for defensive reasons. You have to remember that.
Okay,
that's true. Okay, so in that sense, I'm actually I'm in line with a lot of leftist traditions. I'm not a pacifist. That's the point. I'm not a pacifist. I'm a non-interventionist with foreign policy, but I'm not a pacifist. Those are different things.
Okay.
Yeah. The biggest thing I've always seen is that, it's different because games are interactive. But even then, I've been like, well, that's just like, again, I would go back to your statement about that. That's insulting to the intelligence here. Like, and more than anything else here, the people who oppose it, have you played a game? Most likely not.
0%
so it's usually
chance.
A case of, it's mostly a case of you fear what you don't understand, which goes back to like a human naturistic reaction. But you should want to at least infer how things work in the thing you're opposing before you just flat out oppose it.
It's one of those things. It's just an easy thing to beat up on and a good scapegoat when something bad happens. So, when they start yelping about video games after there's some shooting, it's like that's a great deflection from really changing some policies that would make sense. And it's just a way to waste political energy in a direction where you're scapegoating people.
And then on my last point here about the gaming thing is I really don't God, I'm trying to sound like I'm fawning here, but I don't blame you for not being super active on your gaming front because I feel like when do you have the free time? I feel like
Good point.
people get on me all the time about like
Wow, disgusting.
the
TRIHEX anti-gamer confirmed, guys. Wow.
Well, no, like I see like Kyle's workload between like the shows that are happening like every weekday or whatever, combined with like the homework that's to go into research and that kind of thing, and then you lead to the other shit that you do. I'm just like, when do you have like honestly, like how much free time do you have in a given week to even like if you wanted to game?
Now I would actually say I work normal hours. I would say when you actually do the math on it, because the way the schedule is structured, it's not every day anymore for a live show. So I would say that ultimately I work the same as just anybody working a regular 9 to 5, 5 days a week. But I still don't have much free time. And when I do have free time, it's I like golf. I mean, I know that makes me like a boomer loser, but I mean, I've always played golf since I was a kid, and I like to go out there and because I'm never outside either. That's the other thing. Like I'm never outside, and so getting out there a little bit, getting some sun, and playing golf, which is like 3-4 hour thing. It's a half day event, but whenever I have time off, that's what I try to do. So obviously this time of year in New York with it being cold and sun setting early, it's kind of depressing and annoying, and I get slightly depressed. I don't have seasonal depression. I don't want to like pretend like I do because there are people out there who have it legit and it's like a real problem. But yeah, I'm just slightly less happy in the winter in New York than I would be in the summer when it's nice and bright.
Kyle, I have another question for you. I wanted to talk about Joe Rogan because you briefly mentioned him. You've been on a show twice now. I was wondering what kind of feedback you got and whether it was successful in converting some people because, like I said, you're very approachable by people who are either apolitical or you're very approachable by people who might be on the other side because when they watch you, and I've looked at some of the comments under Joe Rogan's podcast where you've been on. When they watch you, they say, well, you know what? I don't agree with this guy. I don't absolutely hate him. And I think even if I don't agree with this guy, I think he's being genuine. So you have this appeal, especially for people who are further to the right, because I think you and I agree that Joe Rogan certainly has a very interesting and diverse crowd of individuals that follow his content. What do you think? Do you think you've been successful in like maybe changing some people's minds?
I hope so. And I think that maybe I did. I couldn't even venture a guess as to how many people's minds I've changed on going to an outlet like that. But it's interesting because he does tend to have like he has guests from me to Abby Martin to Jimmy Dore all the way over to Gavin McInnes, who he was friends with. But yeah,
Alex
he
Jones,
strikes me. He
Milo
strikes me,
Yiannopoulos.
but he hasn't had on either one of them since the worst of those people.
Sargon of Akkad as well. Yeah, no, I know.
He hasn't had him on for a while either. But listen, when you talk to him on a personal level, he's a really nice guy, really genuine guy, really approachable, and he just strikes me as actually having a mix of views. But when you nail him down on the actual substantive issues that I talk about on my show all the time, he's in favor of universal health care. Obviously, he's in favor of legalizing marijuana. He's in favor of a living wage. He's even in favor of universal basic income. So I think people might get a misimpression of him a little bit because it's so easy to spend a lot of time like bashing social justice warriors. It's like the internet's pastime is just shitting on college kids with pink hair. So that can leave a taste in people's mouth like, oh, he's probably right-leaning. But no, he just strikes me as kind of a regular, somewhat apolitical guy who, if anything, leans left. But the conversations he has, it doesn't really reveal his politics that much. But to answer the main question, I hope I changed some people's minds. I think I changed some people's minds. But yeah, I think his audience might lean to the right because, even when if I feel like I knocked it out of the park, if it's a lefty who's on Rogan's show, you look at the like to dislike and it's like you max out at a 90% like rate. Like that's max. Whereas, any person who leans right, even if they're not making coherent points, they somehow kind of have a natural floor of like 95% likes. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think the internet or especially YouTube especially political YouTube, is heavily leaning towards the right. I think that I think that a lot of creators on YouTube are certainly their starting point is just like right wing, and then it deviates, like it goes from centrists who are naturally right wing, and I would say Sargon of Akkad is one of those quote unquote centrists, all the way to crypto fascists and actual Nazis. So that's part of the reason why there's so many people that either A, get radicalized, or B, are already like fairly in the right, and they just continue moving further down the right, or they keep getting their broken perspective reinforced by all the content that is readily available on YouTube.
I think on this point I'm a little optimistic though in the long run, because I actually kind of have faith in people, because I noticed this from one of the comments on the last time I was on Joe Rogan's show. One of the comments was something to the effect of, have you ever noticed when Joe has a left-winger on, they talk about substantive issues, and when he has a right-winger on, they don't? And that comment stuck with me, because I was like, okay, that light bulb moment for that person. Like, that's it. Now, keep going with that mentality, and go ahead, watch whatever the hell you want to watch on YouTube. I'm not going to tell you not to watch something if you like the person for whatever reason, personality, whatever. But that I think most people at some point in their life will have that light bulb moment of like, what am I actually for? Like, what am I doing here? Like, is my whole thing like, I'm just going to trigger the libs? Like, ooh, I'm just going to be an edgy teen my whole life. Okay, you could do that, but that's like, I don't think that's going to lead to happiness. I think that people, when they actually start caring about things outside of themselves, and they care about like, okay, what are we doing here? How do we make the country better? How do we improve people's lives? And then you dig into the specifics of that, then I think that they actually do kind of turn to the left. So I'm optimistic on that point in the long run. I take your point, but I think in the long run, I'm actually pretty optimistic.
Yeah,
okay.
I can agree with that.
Yeah, I think luckily there are other leftist content creators now that are starting to grow their platforms, and that is that's definitely really helpful in re-educating a lot of these people who have been caught up in that same cycle of like, I hate the libs conversation. TRIHEX, you had something to say. Sorry for cutting you off.
Yeah, my only thing about what you're bringing up there, Kyle, is the do you find though that the I guess like the clickbait fodder of the anti-SJW montages, like the SJW getting owned on a college campus, like with the impromptu debates, do you find that, I feel like, because there's a lot of those, right? It's not hard to go from like one Joe Rogan clip into like two more related videos, and then you're on like what is like an infinite stampede of anti-SJW content with the owned montages. Do you find that those are kind of like what's like giving the appetite for like to be trained to like see these I don't know if I want to call them emotionally charged, but like, dude, there's a lot of yelling going on in most of those montages. Do you think that's kind of like the problem though? Is like this, like, because I kind of talked about a little bit with Hassan the other day here, the algorithm kind of leading to that being in your related videos inevitably, and what will it take? Do you think that there must be like a reduction done on the on those extreme left SJW owned montages in order for the appetite to recognize wanting substance brought up in left topping points?
You're asking a really good question. I think here's the way I view that. Like, the anti-social justice warrior stuff kind of acting as like a gateway into further right-wing or reactionary politics. It's certainly possible that that's there. But I almost kind of look at it in a way, like you go back to, say, 2005, 2006, 2007 online, and there was almost like a mirror image reverse of that happening, where it was a gateway to the left, where people were kind of actively and regularly shitting on authoritarian fundamentalist Christians.
Yes,
and
that's what I want to talk about as well. Perfect.
It was so obvious that these were ridiculous people that kind of made people think, well, if they're ridiculous and this is what they stand for, what else do they believe? And then, of course, fundamentalist Christians have a home in the Republican Party and on the right. So that kind of made people just have this gut reaction of like, okay, I'm just against these people, and so I'm going to be for whatever they're against. And so then you had this big wave of people who were just secular, non-religious, and they cared about rationality, and that kind of helped the left blossom. And now it's the mirror image of that. Now it's, you, like we said before, you take a pink-haired college kid or blue-haired college kid who wants to deplatform somebody, and then, you watch some videos on that, and next thing you know, you're like, well, what else do these social justice warriors believe? Oh, they align with the left politically, and so I'm against that, and I'm going to be for whatever they're against. And yeah, I think that does happen. But I think I have a different reaction to many other people on the left as to how to deal with that, which is, to me, honestly, a lot of the anti-social justice warrior stuff, yeah, it's tone deaf and it's screechy and it's so persistent, but I almost file it under duh. Like, okay, so you don't like it when people are deplatformed on college campuses, and you don't like it when there's an outrage mob over a politically incorrect comment, or even even a comment that's genuinely fucked up. Like, you don't like it when there's this giant backlash. Okay, fair enough. Next, like, let's talk about actual serious, real political issues that impact everybody in the country. Like the fact that we live in a country where if you work full time, you could still not make enough money to survive, or the fact that we have 45,000 people that die every year in this country because we don't have access to basic healthcare, or the fact that we're an empire and we massacre people overseas on a regular basis. We wasted $7 trillion in Iraq and $2 trillion in Afghanistan. And once you start having these serious policy discussions, it's almost like you're letting these people know who are stuck on that frequency of only caring about the social justice warriors, like, hey, dipshit, there's a whole nother world here to have conversations about. And you're like at the lowest level. I mean, how easy is that and stale is that? Like,
so
trigger the libs, like, wow, so impressive.
Sorry, Kyle, I wanted to ask you something about that. This is the conversation I absolutely want to have with you. Because you know what my perspective is a little bit. We briefly talked about it as far as like anti-SJW YouTubers essentially becoming the same SJW YouTubers they originally criticized from a white identity politics perspective. But what I wanted to ask you specifically is that your channel is called Secular Talk, and we both know that a lot of these channels who are now firmly in the conservative anti-SJW, anti-feminism camp were originally secular anti-theists or atheists who were on our side, that actively talked against Christian fundamentalism and how damaging it is to have a government that opposed scientific research and banned stem cell research and set us back, and how terrible the George W. Bush era was. These are when a lot of these channels started, and yet for some weird reason, the overwhelming majority of those channels are now, and I believe this has something to do with Islam and something to do with 9/11, overwhelming majority of those channels became anti-Islam, anti-trans, anti-feminist, and anti-Black Lives Matter. And for some reason, you did not go that way, even though your channel is literally called Secular Talk. So I wanted to see, like, what was why did you have a difference in opinion than the rest of that community when you guys came around the same way in a similar fashion?
That's a great question. And the answer, put very simply, is I care more about the policy substance issues and improving this country and improving people's lives than I care about the goofy culture war. That's the answer. I feel like a lot of people get stuck in that culture war wavelength. And I just think that's like, you're in first grade and I graduated all the way from second, third, fourth, fifth. Like, I'm all the way up there now. I'm in like college or some shit. And you're stuck on that first grade wavelength where you're only talking about the culture war. And honestly, the funny thing is, even though they're obsessed with the culture war, they haven't even graduated to the point of talking about the policy issues relevant to the culture war. So, for example, if you really care about freedom, like maybe ending the drug war should be on the top of your list and exposing it for all of its downsides and its flaws. And
because the blacks are being oppressed, so they like it. They they don't think that the black people who are being oppressed as a consequence of this is necessarily a consequence of the drug or the war on drugs. But instead, because black people are just inherently more violent, so like they're prescribed solutions to like the existing structure or the oppressive structure that currently exists inside of our empire, is something that they just seek to justify as best as they possibly can, rather than really take a skeptical approach, regardless of what their names might be on their YouTube channels, where they say that they are the rational centrists or they are the skeptics. They rarely ever oppose U.S. government. They rarely ever oppose racism and all of these structural inequalities. And they, as a matter of fact, they uphold the status quo by claiming that systemic racism does not exist, and they deny facts that disprove their perspective. So, not very skeptical. You know?
I think that all stems from being stuck in the culture war and just kind of taking reactionary positions based on triggering the libs and based on seeing a video of a pink-haired trans woman on a college campus, and they just laugh at it and think I'm against whatever she's for. And so they're just stuck on this level of analysis that's just like mired in the culture war. And they don't even, like I said, they don't even graduate to, like, there are issues in the culture war that I think haven't even been breached yet. Like, here's one. How about euthanasia? How about the right to physician-assisted suicide? Nobody even talks about that. And I think that's a huge freedom issue. Like, if you're in extreme pain when you're about to die and you're like, I kind of want to go peacefully, so could I get, can I get that right? Like, I mean, we treat dogs better than we treat our grandmas and grandpas. Like, that's one of those issues. And there's a million of them. How about the right to, there should be legal, taxed, and regulated sex work in this country. There should be legal, taxed, and regulated gambling in this country. Like, it's amazing because these people care so much about the culture war, but they don't even get to, like, well, here are the relevant policies that we could have a conversation about to really have a culture war and have a side that's pro-freedom. It's just all stuck on this level of, like, I'm going to trigger the libs and I'm against whatever they're for.
Well, I think as far as, like, on the side of content creators, it also happens because the content creators are reinforced by clicks, and they're reinforced by being able to monetize these sorts of videos, and they get to expand their audience greatly, especially when they even partner up with people that are further to the right than them and engage them in meaningful conversations, or engage them in the realm of discourse when they're not necessarily engaging them. I'm, of course, referring to people like Dave Rubin and even people like Sargon of Akkad, who are ineffective in dealing with people like Richard Spencer for some reason. And I think that kind of guides them down this rabbit hole as well, because the profit motive is too strong, and that they don't really care about what they're saying when they're developing their platform.
I'm optimistic that it's a phase, though. I'm optimistic that this is a phase, in the same way that it was like a phase where there was the rise of the left online around 2006, 2007, and now with the rise of Trump and the rise of the right online. I mean, it's gonna be a pendulum. It's gonna go back and forth, and it's not like I don't want people to be hopeless where they think we're stuck in this static position of, like, it's always gonna be the case that somebody watches a video online and ends up, like, believing everything Richard Spencer says. I think that people will snap out of it, and in fact, I think we're actually seeing the beginning of the pendulum going the other direction.
All right.
Thank you, Yellow Cape, for the 5 Tier 1 community gift subs. Thank you so much. TRIHEX, what do you have to say about that?
I very, very surface level. I think that was worded really, really well, and I agree. I wish I had more to elaborate on there. I can think of other topics that I can probably chime in further on, but I pretty much agree with everything Kyle brought to that point.
What do you want to talk about? Let's talk about what you want to talk about. What are some issues that you see? Because you're a gamer. Like, you are very much a part of this. You're very much a part of this culture.
Shout out to Destiny, by the way.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say, yeah.
Oh, you know of him? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
I just recently listen. It's funny because I have a boomer mindset, so I don't know much. I'm such a normie, as the kids say.
People are freaking out.
Recently, I stumbled across a Destiny debate on Race and IQ, and I think he just knocked it out of the park and really kind of pulled the mask off of the absurdity of the conversation. And I just wanted to give him credit on that. And to be fair, I really haven't seen much of his stuff, but when I watched that video, I was like, oh, that's cool. So we have, like, somebody in the gaming community who's actually pushing back, and I think there's going to be a lot more of that moving forward.
Hell yes. That's actually Destiny's the reason why really I know about TRIHEX as well. But sorry, TRIHEX, go ahead.
No, that's actually really, really awesome.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of where I even go with that now. Destiny's actually been on. I forget, was he on Fox News? He was on something at one point. I know you've been on Fox News twice now, but He was on, I think it was maybe David Pakman's show. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, he's been doing some big moves last couple of years now. The thing that I can think of here, all right. So let me give you the situation of why I was like previously, like in terms of like being a content creator, I was more apolitical. I was never actually apolitical, but like I never exposed my political leanings or anything I was passionate about advocating for. Was because I got a lot of backlash whenever throughout the 2016 election, whenever there was like, the DNC fucking over Bernie and there was blatant corruption going on here. Hillary's like points were like zero substance and a bunch of nonsense alongside going for like weak limp noodle shit like $12 an hour being a living wage rather than going for advocating for something stronger like $15 an hour. Alongside just the rampant amount of lies going on throughout the Republican campaign, whether it be Chris Christie lying about things or Trump calling out talking points that then people have to double down on, and just all the nonsense circus, right? To me, it all seemed alarmingly absurd, and I wanted to call out these things. I remember yelling at my TV watching some of these debates that were going on, and I was hesitant to do that because of because I've never been really active on politics on my Twitter and my stream, and I didn't know how much of my own fan base were Trumpist or very right leaning or really because they'll infer, if they like you, they'll project themselves, the best of themselves onto you. So it's like kind of like you're cannibalizing your own audience if you go further and further into that rabbit hole. And so for a long time, I was scared until like Trump won, and then things were like, then you saw like a big rise in like I don't want to call it domestic hate crimes, I guess. Like I saw, like N-word slurs on restroom stalls at certain schools are happening throughout North Carolina. You had more people snatching hijabs off persons and stuff like that. I remember a couple incidents here and there I was reading about. I was like, oh, this is so bad. This actually makes me very, very sad. I wish I could do something right now, and I wanted to advocate for like bringing awareness to these things that were going on and be part of the solution rather than like, stand by and let the status quo continue. And the thing, bringing it back to you here, is that I did that at first for a couple times, but I was losing Twitter followers. I was losing, I was getting in like, I guess, impromptu social media debates, which aren't really debates. It's more like, I'm going to reinforce my worldview and tell you, fuck you, you fucking idiot, and move on. You don't really change anything. It's not really productive. And I felt like I could be doing better on my own bottom line by just not engaging and just going to stream and play games instead, right? So my thing back to you is, how do you deal with that? Do you even go to your Twitter mentions? Do you even go down that thing? Because I feel like it's a giant shit stain waiting to be acknowledged in your laundry bin.
Yeah, no. I mean, I know that there are criticisms that are legit and that I can read and digest and even agree with. But then there's always a solid chunk of the criticisms that are just like, this is so wrong and so off base that it literally impacts your mental health. Like if you are swimming in that ocean of the Twitter mentions, like you'll start to think the worst of yourself. You'll be like, am I like dead wrong about everything? Like am I a dick? Did I not make myself clear? Is this person correct? Because there are people, no matter how clear you think you are and no matter how much you think you're standing for the right things and making solid arguments, there are people who fucking despise you with every five. They hate everything about you. They hate the things you say.
They love
hate how
hating
you
you.
say it. Yeah. So no, I think that there's a tipping point. I don't know what that number is of followers on Twitter, because that's the main social media outlet I use. But there's a tipping point where I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't read the mentions anymore. So if I ever even happen to see a mention, it's really by accident, because I just wasn't going to sit there and be like, feel like shit off of comments that I know are bullshit. Just complete, like, let me think about this objective and as reasonably as possible. And this is a bullshit thing this person is saying. So no, I just don't do it anymore. But but then I get spoiled, because then there was the flip side of that, where when I went to Politicon, there were just so many great listeners to the show who came, and the things they said, man, it really touches you. They're like, oh, you changed my life and you really helped me in this way and that way. And I was like, wow, I don't deserve this like heaping praise and adoration, and it just makes you feel like, wow, this is amazing. So you get the extremes on both ends, I guess. You get the negative onslaught sometimes, but then you get the positive stuff. And yeah, I mean, I don't. My only policy that I try to abide by now is just don't spend a lot of time going through Twitter mentions, and just kind of keep your nose to the grindstone and keep trying to just do what you do. And the fact of the matter is, when you do political commentary, you're always going to be, by its very nature, political commentary is going to make it so that about half the people hate you and about half the people like you. Like, that's just the very nature of it. Like, because then, you know, if somebody's nominally on the left, even if they're like an establishment Democrat, if they hear me talking about, like, I don't know, pick the issue, the minimum wage, they'll be like, oh, I agree with him on that. So it's like, you're going to have about half the people like you, half the people hate you for politics. So it's just kind of par for the course, and you have to acknowledge that. Whereas I'd be curious to know for you, like, for what you do you find that generally, if you just stay apolitical, that it's nothing but support?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, it's like, if you want to be objectively the biggest person ever, like, do you think that, for example, like you brought up Fortnite, do you think that Ninja's ever going to bring up politics on a stream? Fuck no. Like, that's a hindering to the expansion of your audience pool. Because again, I forget the principle in terms of the psychology of it, but if someone likes you, the less they know about you, the more they'll infer of what they like about you. They'll just assume and fill in, like, you know, until they find out that you don't like things.
That's interesting. I never even knew that, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, someone could probably help me out here if they can Google give me like a quick like chronic Googling here of what it's called. But yeah, there's a thing about that. So
I mean,
it's
it makes sense. It's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ninja's existence is not necessarily political. I talked about this briefly with you before in a previous conversation, TRIHEX, but we are conditioned to think that being a straight white male is the default, and therefore any identity politics that pertains to straight white males oftentimes gets ignored as identity politics. It wouldn't be. It would usually be considered just regular politics, right? So because of that, it's easy for someone like Ninja to not necessarily engage in identity politics or in any sort of politics, because no matter what happens, especially now that he's like wealthy too, no matter what happens, he's always going to be a part of the ruling class from a capitalist versus socialist perspective, and even from an SJW versus anti-SJW perspective, he's always going to be on the top of the totem pole as far as his identity. So none of the policies will impact him in a negative way. So it's easy for someone like him to avoid even having this discussion. But when you yourself are having this discussion with your audience, and when you're talking to them, some of the people are literally actively participating in the dehumanization of black people, or actively justifying the criminal justice system that disproportionately targets communities of color. So your existence is inherently political. Everyone's is. It's just a matter of power dynamics. Now, Kyle might disagree with me on this, so I want to hear your perspective as well, Kyle, and yours as well, TRIHEX.
I mean, I've been a critic of identity politics, but I also acknowledge that, I mean, Trumpism is largely an identity politics movement. I mean, it's a white identity politics movement. And in fact, it's kind of open and just a well-known historical fact that the Republican Party, post the signing of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, their whole strategy it's called the Southern strategy. And the whole point of it is we need to try to get Southern white males to vote for us. And so we're gonna appeal to only Southern white males. And so I would agree with the point that oftentimes in common parlance, when somebody says identity politics, the immediate interpretation is like, oh, black people, brown people, people of color, and social justice warriors and all that stuff. That's what people think of. But in reality, identity politics also means white identity politics, which ironically, to go back to something we spoke about before, Hassan, that's what a lot of the people on the right who cloaked themselves in this idea of, I believe in individualism, that's what I believe in, now all of a sudden they've become part of these collectivist movements based on white identity. So they're going against their own principles with that approach, which again actually is one of the reasons why I'm hopeful for the future, because the the far right resurgence is honestly a movement built on sand. It's a foundation of sand because it doesn't make sense in so many different ways. So when people snap out of it and realize that, and I think many of them will as they grow, they're going to go, oh, okay, like what was really going on here? But yeah, it's an interesting point. You're saying that people of color don't have the luxury of being able to be non-political because you're saying their existence is political by its nature.
I think existence is political for everyone. I mean, the fact that the fact that we think that a boss gets to or a CEO gets to secure an overwhelming chunk of the earnings of a company versus the worker barely makes do and barely skirts along and has to live with the constant crippling fear of losing their job if they don't act appropriately. That is political, okay? Everything we do is political. The fact that Kylie Jenner is the youngest female billionaire is political. We're just conditioned not to understand that this is political. But it is very difficult to not feel as though your existence is political if you're a member of a marginalized community, and that's what I mean.
And by the way, to steal from Chomsky again, to your point about how just having a boss in and of itself is political, that's true. In fact, Chomsky describes a capitalist system where there's a traditional hierarchy and a boss. He says they're technically little private tyrannies, like little private dictatorships, where the boss can tell you to do like almost anything. There are a few rules where they can't tell you, the boss, can't tell you to murder somebody or suck his dick. Like that's technically illegal, but like almost anything else, the boss can tell you to do it. So it's like a little private tyranny. And you're right, the people don't think about that. Like they think, oh, I just have a job and I go to my job and that's just what I do. I'm not even political. No, that by its very nature is political. I mean, that's very, very, very political.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we agree on that. So my point is always that, and by the way, I even agree with you as far as like SJW politics or identity politics in the narrow framework that a lot of liberals analyze it from. That doesn't really factor in class and how damaging that is to an overall coalition that we should be building. I think that if you exclusively focus, and there are a lot of uninformed liberals on the SJW side who exclusively look at identity politics from the lens of like only marginalized people's voices should be heard, and this is somewhat of a meme, and it's been it's usually the only thing that you see if you're on the right or if you're on the internet or if you're on YouTube. Like the only introduction you have to like leftist opinions is not from the leftists themselves. There's not from the intelligent advocates, but instead these hysterical social justice warriors on college campuses. Now those social justice warriors might mean well, but if they don't include class as a part of that power dynamic, and absolutely include white people as well as also exploited and deliberately craft their message to help them understand that, like, look, no, if you're a white person, you also have been exploited historically. You've just been exploited by other white folk. Like, it falls short if you don't necessarily include class as a part of your intersectional message. So I do agree with you. If we hyper focus on just like a few identities, it seems like it's very unappealing to the masses because you have to craft your message and educate them on empathy, on why they should feel for the marginalized. So, and if you don't help them understand that they too are marginalized by the system, then it's not going to work. It's going to be too divisive, and it's easy to dunk on.
I think there's nothing more pathetic than the cynical weaponization by establishment Democrats of identity politics.
I agree.
Where they use that to override the fact that they're not offering anything substantively in terms of the policy issues. So they think if you just be kind enough to people of color and tell them that they're great, and then just don't offer them anything in terms of improving their lives with concrete policy, but that's our path forward. And it's like, what? And listen, I'm just letting everybody know right now, there's going to be a war in 2020, and there will be the cynical weaponization of identity
race
politics
war
yet
now.
Again, used against Bernie Sanders and his supporters on the left. And they're going to erase the people of color who support Bernie Sanders on the left, and they're going to act like, you're all just racist, brocialist Bernie bros if you support Bernie Sanders and you're not, they're going to make these cynical cases for Kamala Harris and for others. And they're going to try to use identity politics to override the lack of substance on serious issues. And it's going to be terrible. And we're already seeing it now, by the way. I don't know if you saw this, but David Pakman, Amy Siskind wrote an article or tweeted something like, I will not vote for a white male in 2020. And then he was like, that's like a little racist and sexist. And she not only blocked him, but then called a university where he worked and said, I don't want you to have him back as a professor.
Dude.
And there's going to be a lot of stuff like that moving forward.
Dude.
Happening.
You know this happens to fucking members who are this happens to socialists or leftists all the time too, and it's so fucking frustrating, and no one ever talks about it. I mean, look at what happened to Mark Lamont Hill on CNN when he got banned from CNN, and people, the same people who are free speech absolutists supposedly, either shut the fuck up, like Barry Weiss, who was like, hey, let's take a look at the intellectual dark web. They're free speech absolutists and warriors and champions and intellectual giants. Did not say a single fucking peep. Did not make a single fucking peep. Also, Barry Weiss, again, started off her career by snitching on BDS activists and Palestinian activists on college campuses and deplatforming them, and also fucking making sure that they lost their jobs. This sort of unequal dynamic is precisely the reason why I advocate for looking at this issue and analyzing it from a case-by-case basis, and then making sure that we deliberately educate people on what our platform represents, or what our that for example, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and that conflation should not exist, and that people should not lose their jobs for advocating for a different way of reorganizing society. But they should, again, if they're advocating for really, really dangerous ideas that ultimately arrive at the conclusion that like white people and black people, or white people and other minorities, it cannot live with one another, we should show people that is a different way, that is a different kind of ideology, that's a different kind of mentality, that's very different than just advocating for socialism or advocating for a free Palestine.
By the way, they literally say supporting BDS is anti-Semitic. They say it.
Yeah.
Like they don't even try to couch it and imply it or do a nuanced thing. They're just like, if you support BDS, you're an anti-Semite. It's like, wow, you guys are just, that is like the straight up cynical weaponization of identity politics.
Ben Shapiro is advocating
I really
for
gotta
sedition.
Go. I'm like,
oh, you're about to
35 minutes late. Yeah, I really gotta go.
Oh, fuck, man. Okay, well, Kyle, it was incredible having you on TRIHEX. You want to say some last words?
Shit, fuck. I agree with everything you're saying. There's going to be a lot of oppression. There's already plenty of evidence of voter suppression going on in the midterms. You can see that very evidently in the Georgia governor race. You can see that with that one mailing center in Florida. Was one to get to talking about Beto O'Rourke and Andrew Gillum, but I guess we'll get to that another time or whenever you get a chance. All good. Much love. I agree with you even further here because you got people who are advocating for progressives like Cory Booker, who's just loaded in like corrupt pharma PAC money, who's a piece of shit. But we'll get to that another time if we can. The last thing I actually had a follow up here about the Twitter thing, which that one is that I do think there's a big problem in social media that reinforces the particular user's worldview. So the debating on Twitter and social media is kind of an effective way. I do agree it's much more productive to just use your platform to advocate for things you care about, rather than going on one-on-one impromptu debates where it's going to tell you like know you all day long as a comeback, which is not really like effective debating. And then finally here, if you're really burnt out on the mentions being mostly toxic, Kyle, have you considered trying there's an option called verified only. I don't know if it's like really that effective at that point because you're kind of like neutering what you're going to see in the interactions, but you could try verified only in your mentions. So that way you would see, for example, you'd see Hassan tell you, hey, what's up.
Too elitist for me. I like
that's what I figure.
Every now and then I like to accidentally see a tweet slip through as I breeze past my mentions. But yeah, I just try to avoid it as much as possible. But I'm not gonna shut it off completely.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Kyle, you better fucking come back on, dude. You and I have a lot more to discuss, by the way. I hope.
All right.
I'm serious, dude. It was incredible having you on. Thank you so much for coming on, by the way.
All right.
TRIHEX, you want to stay on?
Thanks to both of you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, dude. Much love.
Nice meeting you. Bye, guys.